Yeah, I'm trying. Anyways, how's everyone doing today? I'm making sure that I'm in the right area. I don't have that up right now. Yeah, okay. I'm trying to figure out what I should do. Besides cry. I'm sorry, I'm in like a piss poor mood, so I'm hoping that hanging out with you guys will make me feel better. So we're gonna be reading another Cthulhu Mythos book today from H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah, he is an asshole, but he has really good writing. It's very detailed that a lot of people just don't do anymore. I don't really have this. Yeah. How's everyone doing today? Well, it disappeared, so there's that. Back to screen. Okay. It's right. This is how today's gonna go, isn't it? Takes up the whole bloody screen. Okay. Get rid of this stuff for today. There. Okay. Sorry about that. I didn't really have that situated. So we're gonna be doing a reading stream today. And I am in a horrible mood. So I'm trying not to cry. So I just want to kind of get started into it today. So yeah, let's get started. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Let me get the ambiance going. Yeah, I think I might listen to it too today. Hopefully it'll help calm me down. Hold on. Let me move a little bit closer. Sorry, guys. Okay. Just kind of... I don't want to listen to something. It's a little loud for me, so I don't want to feel like I'm screaming at you guys. I don't want it to be too loud. Yeah, that's good. Okay. So let's get started. shall we? Just jump right into this. So, H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. This is a part of the Cthulhu mythos. Granted, this is all the stories we've read is kind of part of the world, not necessarily Cthulhu. This particular one is about Cthulhu himself. So, At the Mountains of Madness, Chapter 1. I am forced into speech because men of science have refused to follow my advice, without knowing why. It is altogether against my will that I tell my reasons for opposing this contemplated invasion of the Antarctic. With its vast fossil hunt and its wholesome boring and melting of the ancient ice cap, and I am the more reluctant because my warning may be in vain. Doubt of the real facts, as I may reveal them, is inevitable. Yet if I suppress what will seem extravagant and incredible, there would be nothing left. Somebody withheld photographs, both ordinary and aerial, will count in my favor, for they are damnably vivid and graphic. Still, they will be doubted because of the great lengths to which clever fakery can be carried. The ink drawings, of course, will be jeered as an obvious impostors, notwithstanding a strangeness of technique, which our experts ought to remark and puzzle over. In the end, I must rely on the judgment and standing on the few scientific leaders who have, on the other hand, sufficient independence of thought to weigh my data on its own hideously convincing merits, or in the light of certain primordial and high-baffling myth cycles, and on the other hand, sufficient influence to deter the exploring world in general from any rash and overambitious program in the region of those mountains of madness. It is an unfortunate fact that relatively obscure men like myself and my associates connected only with a small university have little chance of making an impression where matters of a wildly bizarre or highly controversial nature are concerned. Let me get back to here. It is further against us that we are not, in the strictest sense, specialists in the fields which came primarily to be concerned. As a geologist, my object in leading the Miskatonic University expedition was, hey, we've seen this university several times without the book. University expedition was wholly that of securing deep-level specimens of rock and soil from various parts of the Antarctic continent, aided by the remarkable drill devised by Professor Frank H. Peabody of our engineering department. I had no wish to be a pioneer in any other field than this, but I did hope that the use of this new mechanical appliance at different points along previously explored paths would bring to light materials of a sort unreached by the ordinary methods of collection. Peabody's drilling apparatus at the public already knows from our reports was unique and radical in its lightness, portability, and capacity to combine the ordinary artisan drill principle with the principle of the small circular rock drill in such a way as to cope quickly with strata of varying hardness, steel head, jointed rods, gasoline motor, collapsible wood derrick, dynamiting, cordoning, rubbish removal, and sectional piping for bores 5 inches wide and up to 1,000 feet deep, all formed, with needed accessories, no greater load than 3 7-dog sledges could carry, this being made possible by the clever aluminum alloy of which most of the metal objects were fashioned. 4 large airplanes designed especially for the tremendous altitude flying necessary on the Antarctic plateau, and with added fuel warming and quick starting devices worked out by Peabody, could transport our entire expedition from a base at the edge of the Great Ice Barrier to various suitable inland points, and from those points a sufficient quota of dogs would serve us. We plan to cover as great as an area as one Antarctic season, or longer, if absolutely necessary, would permit, operating mostly in the mountain ranges and on the plateau south of Ross Sea. Regions explored in varying degree by Shackleton, Amsden, Scott, and Bird, with frequent changes of camp made by airplane and involving distances great enough to be of geological significance. We expected to unearth a quite unprecedented amount of material, especially in the Cambrian strata, of which so narrow a range of Antarctic specimens had previously been secured. We wished also to obtain as great as possible a variety of the upper phosphorus rocks, since the primal life history of this bleak realm of ice and death is of the highest importance to our knowledge of the Earth's past. That the Antarctic continent was once temperate and even tropical, with a teeming vegetable and animal life, of which marine fauna, arachnid, and penguins of the northern edge are the only survivals. It is a matter of common information, and we hope to expand this information in variety, accuracy, and detail. When a simple boring revealed fossiliferous signs, we would enlarge the aperture by blasting in order to get the specimens of suitable size and condition. Our borings of varying depths. What does this have to do with Cthulhu? I guess this is the mountains. I guess we're getting the backstory on the mountains. Our borings of varying depth, according to the promise held out by the upper soil or rock, were to be confined to exposed or nearly exposed land surfaces, these inevitably being slopes. Easy, I would love to be here, but lost. No, Obsidian, you're fine. I just started this story. It's called At the Mountains of Madness, and we just started, and they're just telling us about, like, what they were doing at the dig site. Like, I'm still confused. I don't 100% know what's happening. I'm not 100% sure what's happening either. I just know that we're at a dig site, and we're in Antarctica, and they're trying to find penguins. So, but yeah, definitely help out Sage. Let's get him to affiliate. I'm sure he's playing Fallout 76. Well, maybe not. He's probably playing something else before Fallout 76. These inevitably being slopes and ridges because of the 1 or 2 mile thickness of the solid ice overlying the lower levels. We cannot afford to waste drilling depth or any considerable amount of mere glaciation. Though Pabadi had worked out a plan for sinking copper electrodes in thick clusters of borings and melting off limited areas of ice with current from a gasoline-driven dynamo. It is this plan which we could not put into effect except experimentally on an expedition such as ours. Oh, good. I'm going to finish up this page, and then I'm going to answer text message back. Is when effect experimentally on an expedition such as ours that the coming stark weather more expedition proposes to follow despite the warnings I've issued since our return from the Antarctic. So they're coming back from the Antarctic. Okay. Okay. Oh, that's right. He did say he had a new game he was gonna play. I totally forgot about that. Alright, Obsidian, thank you so much for hanging out. And enjoy, let me know how, Quantum Break is. Hold on, I'm getting a phone call now. Hello? Okay. Whatever. The public knows of the Miskatonic expedition through our frequent wireless reports to the Arkham Advisor and Associated Press, and through the later articles of Peabody and myself. We consisted of 4 men from the university: Peabody, Lake of the Biology Department; Atwood of the Physics Department. Didn't we meet Atwood in another story? Also a meteorologist, and I representing geology, and having nominal command besides 16 assistants, 7 graduate students from Miskatonic, and 9 skilled mechanics. Of these 16, 12 were qualified airplane pilots, all but 2 who were competent wireless operators. 8 of them understood navigation with compass and sextant, as did Peabody, Atwood, and I. Weren't these the guys that came from the, weren't these guys also in, like, one of the other books? I'll have to go back and check. In addition, of course, our 2 ships, wooden ex-whalers, reinforced for ice conditions, having auxiliary steam, were fully manned. The Nathaniel Derby Pickman Foundation, aided by a few special contributions, financed the expedition. Hence, our preparations were extremely thorough, despite the absence of great publicity. The dogs, sledges, machines, camp materials, and unassembled parts of our 5 planes were delivered in Boston, and there our ships were loaded. We were marvelously well equipped for our specific purpose, and on all matters pertaining to supplies, regiment, transportation, and camp construction, we profited by the excellent example of our many recent, exceptionally brilliant predecessors. It was the unusual number and fame of these predecessors which made our own expedition ample through though it was, so little noticed by the world at large. As the newspapers told, we sailed from Boston Harbor on September 2nd, 1930. Taking a leisurely course down the coast and through the Panama Canal, and stopping at Samoa and Hobart, Tasmania. I don't know if I said any of those words right. At which latter place we took on final supplies. None of our exploring parties had ever been in the polar regions before, hence we all relied greatly on our ship captains, J.B. Douglas, commanding the brig Arkham, and serving as commander of the sea party, and George, I'm not saying your last name because I can't pronounce it, commanding the bark Miskatonic, both veteran whalers in Antarctic waters. As we left the inhabited world behind, the sun sank lower and lower in the north, and stayed longer and longer above the horizon each day. At about 62 degrees south latitude, we sighted our first icebergs, table-like objects with vertical sides, and just before reaching the Antarctic Circle, which we crossed on October 20th, with appropriately quaint ceremonies, we were considerably troubled with field ice. The falling temperature bothered me considerably after our long voyage through the tropics, but I tried to brace up for the worst rigors to come. On many occasions, with curious atmospheric effects enchanted me vastly, these including a striking vivid mirage, the first I had ever seen, in which distant bergs became the battlements of unimaginable cosmic castles. Pushing through the ice, which was fortunately neither extensive nor thickly packed, we regained open water at south latitude 67, east latitude 175. On the morning of October 26th, a strong land blink appeared on the south, and before noon we all felt a thrill of excitement at beholding a vast, lofty, and snow-clad mountain chain which opened out and covered the whole vista ahead. At last, we had encountered an outpost of the great unknown continent and its cryptic world of frozen death. These peaks were obviously the Admiralty range discovered by Fort Ross, and it would now be our task to round Cape Adair and sail down the east coast of Victoria Land to our contemplated base on the shore of McMurdo Sound at the foot of the volcano Erebus in south latitude 77.9. Oh my god. Oh god. Okay. There's like, oh, it's not that bad. It's only like 100 pages. I feel like it's more because of how thick the pages are. Hold on. I'm trying to like use something as a indicator. Bookmark. The last lap of the voyage was vivid and fancy-stirring. Great barren peaks of mystery looming up constantly against the west as the low northern sun of noon, or the still lower horizon grazing southern sun of midnight, poured its hazy reddish rays over the white snow, bluish ice and water lanes, and bits of exposed granite slope. Through the desolate summit swept raging intermittent gusts of the terrible Antarctic wind, whose cadences sometimes held vague suggestions of a wild and half-sentient musical piping, with notes extending over a wide range, and which for some subconscious mnemonic reason seemed to me disquieting and even dimly terrible. Something about the scene reminded me of the strange and disturbing paintings of Nicholas, is it Roerich? I tried. And of all the still stranger and more disturbing descriptions of the evilly fabled plateau of Lang, which occur in the dreaded Necronomicon of the mad Abdul Alhazred. I was rather sorry later on that I ever looked into the monstrous book at the college library. So he did. On the 7th of November, sight of the westward range having been temporarily lost, we passed Franklin Island, and the next day descried the cones of mountains Erebus and Terror on Ross Island ahead, with the long line of the Perry Mountains beyond. There now stretched off the east the low, white line of the Great Ice Barrier, rising perpendicularly to a height of 200 feet like the rocky cliffs of Quebec, and marking the sound of southward navigation. In the afternoon, we entered McMurdo Sound and stood off the coast of Smoking Mountain Erebus. I don't know if I'm saying the name right. The peak towered up some 12,700 feet against the eastern sky, like a print of the sacred Mount Fuji, while beyond it rose the ghost-like height of Mount Terror, 10,900 feet in altitude. I know the only reason I know these mountains was because of the SSX game, the snowboarding game, all because of that. While beyond it rose the white ghost-like height of Mount Terror, 10,900 feet in altitude, and now extinct as a volcano. Puffs of smoke from Erebus came intermittently, and one of the graduate assistants, a brilliant young fellow named Danforth, pointed out what looked like lava on the snowy slope, remarking that this mountain, discovered in 1840, had undoubtedly been the source of Poe's image when he wrote 7 years later of the lavas that restlessly roll their sulphurous currents down. I don't know. In the ultimate climbs of the pole, they groan as they roll down. Mount. It sounds like your neck. Y'all neck? I don't know if I'm saying any of these right. I'm so sorry. In the realms of the pole. Danforth was a great reader of bizarre material and had talked a good deal of Poe. I was interested myself because of the Antarctic scene of Poe's only long story, the disturbing and enigmatical Arthur Gordon Pym. On the barren shore and on the lofty ice barrier in the background, myriads of grotesque penguins squawked and flapped their fins, while many fat seals were visible on the water, swimming or sprawling across large cakes of slowly drifting ice. Using small boats, we effected a difficult landing on Ross Island shortly after midnight on the morning of the 9th, carrying a line of cable from each of the ships and preparing to unload supplies by means of a breeches buoy arrangement. Our sensations on first treading Antarctic soil were poignant and complex, even though at this particular point the Scott and Shackleton expeditions had preceded us. Our camp on the frozen shore below the volcano slope was only a provisional one, headquarters being kept aboard the Arkham. We landed all our drilling apparatus, dogs, sledges, tents, provisions, gasoline tanks, experimental ice melting outfit, cameras both ordinary and aerial, airplane parts, and other accessories, including their 3 small portable wireless outfits, besides those in the plane, capable of communicating with the Arkham's large outfit from any part of the Antarctic continent that we would be likely to visit. The ship's outfit, communicating with the outside world, was to convey press reports to the Arkham's advisor's powerful wireless station on Kingsport Head, Massachusetts. We hoped to complete our work during a single Antarctic summer, but if this proved impossible, we would winter on the Arkham, sending the Miskatonic north before the freezing of the ice for another summer's supplies. I need not repeat what the newspapers have already published about our early work. Of our ascent of Mount Erebus, our successful mineral boring at several points on Ross Island, and the singular speed with which Peabody's apparatus accomplished them, even through solid rock layers, our provisional tests of the small ice melting equipment, our perilous ascent of the Great Barrier with sledges and supplies, and our final assembling of 5 huge airplanes at the camp atop the barrier. The health of our land party, 20 men and 55 Alaskan sledge dogs, was remarkable, though of course we had so far encountered no really destructive temperatures or windstorms. For the most part, the thermometer varied between 0 and 20 degrees, or 25, above, and our experience with New England winters had accustomed us to rigors of this sort. The barrier camp was semi-permanent and destined to be a storage cache for gasoline, provisions, dynamite, and other supplies. Only 4 of our planes were needed to carry the actual exploring material, the 5th being left with a pilot and 2 men from the ships at the storage cache to form a means of reaching us from the Arkham in case of all of our exploring planes were lost. Later, when not using all the other planes for moving apparatus, we would employ 1 or 2 in a shuttle transportation service between this cache and another permanent base on the Great Plateau from 600 to 700 miles southward beyond Beardmore Glacier. Despite the almost unanimous accounts of appalling winds and tempests that poured down from the plateau, we determined to dispense with intermediate bases, taking our chances in the interest of economy and probable efficiency. Wireless reports have spoken of the breathtaking 4-hour non-stop flight of our squadron on November 21st over the lofty shelf ice, with vast peaks rising on the west and the unfathomed silence echoing to the sound of our engines. Wind troubled us only moderately, and our radio compasses helped us through the one fog we encountered. When the vast rise loomed ahead between latitudes 83 and 84, we knew we had reached Beardmore Glacier, the largest valley glacier in the world, and that the frozen sea was now giving place to a frowning and mountainous coastline. At last, we were truly entering the white, dead world of the ultimate south, and even as we realized it, we saw the peak of Mount Nansen in the eastern distance, towering up to its height of almost 15,000 feet. The successful establishment of the southern base above the glacier in latitude 86.7 east, longitude 174.23, and the phenomenally rapid and effective borings and blasting made at various points reached by our sledge trips in short air flights are matters of history, as is the triumphant ascent of Mount Nansen by Peabody and two of the graduate students, Gedney and Carroll. On December 13th through the 15th, we were some 8,500 feet above sea level, and when experimental drillings revealed solid ground only 12 feet down through the snow and ice at certain points, we made considerable use of the small melting apparatus and sunk bores and performed dynamiting at many places where no previous explorer had ever thought of securing mineral specimens. The Cambrian granites and Beacon sandstones thus obtained confirmed our belief that this plateau was the great bulk of the continent to the west, but somewhat different from the parts lying eastward below South America. Excuse me. Which we then thought to form a separate and smaller continent divided from that larger one by a frozen junction of Ross and Weddell seas, though Bird has since disproved the hypothesis. In certain of the sandstones dynamited and chiseled after boring revealed their nature, we found some highly interesting fossil markings and fragments, notably ferns, seaweeds, mollusks, gastropods, all of which seemed of real significance in connection with the region's primordial history. There's also an odd triangular marking about a foot in greatest diameter, which Lake pieced together from three fragments of slate wrought up from a deep blasted heart. These fragments came from a point to the westward, near the Queen Alexandra Range, and Lake, as a biologist, seemed to find their curious markings unusually puzzling and provocative, though to my geological eye it looked not unlike some of the ripple effects reasonably common in the sedimentary rocks, since slate is no more than a metamorphic formation into which a sedimentary is pressed, and since the pressure itself produces odd distorting effects on any markings which may exist, I saw no reason for extreme wonder about the depression. On January 6, 1931, Lake, Peabody, Danforth, all 6 of the students, 4 mechanics, and I flew directly over the South Pole in 2 of the Great Plains, being forced down once by a sudden high wind, which fortunately did not develop into a typical storm. This was, as the papers have stated, one of several observational flights, during others of which we tried to discern new topographical features in areas unreached by previous explorers. Our early flights were disappointing in this latter respect, though they afforded us some magnificent examples of the richly fantastic and deceptive mirages of the polar regions, of which our sea voyage had given us some brief foretastes. Distant mountains floated in the sky as enchanted cities, and often the whole world would dissolve into a gold, silver, and scarlet land of dreams and adventurous expectancy under the magic of the low midnight sun. On cloudy days, we had considerable trouble in flying, owing to the tendency of snowy earth and sky to merge into one mystical void with no visible horizon to mark the junction of the two. At length, we resolved to carry our original plan of flying 500 miles eastward, with all 4 exploring planes, and establishing a fresh subbase at a point which would probably be on the smaller continental division as we mistakenly conceived it. Geological specimens obtained there would be desirable for purposes of comparison. Our health so far has remained excellent, lime juice well offsetting the steady diet of tinned and salted food, and temperatures generally above zero, enabling us to do without our thickest furs. It was now midsummer, and with haste and care we might be able to conclude work by March, and avoid a tedious wintering through the long Antarctic night. Several savage windstorms had burst upon us from the west, but we had escaped damage through the skill of Atwood in devising rudimentary airplane shelters and windbreaks of heavy snow blocks, and reinforcing the principal camp buildings with snow. Our good luck and efficiency had indeed been utmost uncanny. almost uncanny. The outside world knew, of course, of our program and was told also of Lake's strange and dogged insistence on a westward, or rather northwestward, prospecting trip before a radical shift to the new base. It seems he had pondered a great deal, and with alarmingly radical daring, over that triangular marking in the slate, reading into it certain contradictions in nature and geological period which blank his curiosity to the utmost, and made him avid to sink more borings and blasting in the west stretching formation to which the fragments evidently belonged. He was strangely convinced that the marking was the print of some bulky, unknown, and radically unclassifiable organism of considerably advanced evolution, notwithstanding that the rock which bore it was of so vastly ancient a date, as to preclude the probable existence not only of the highly evolved life, but of any life at all, above the unicellular, or at most the trilobite stage. These fragments, with their odd markings, much have been 500 million to 1,000 million years old. That's a lot of millions, man. It's a lot of millions. Chapter 2. God, that was only chapter 1. We have a bit to go. Like, we have, like... We're at 253. We've read 20 pages. This is gonna take a bit of time today. Chapter 2. Popular imagination, I judge, responded actively to our wireless bulletins of Lake start northwestward into regions never trodden by human foot or penetrated by human imagination, though we did not mention his wild hopes of revolutionizing the entire sciences of biology and geology. His preliminary sledging and boring journey of January 11th to the 18th with Peabody and 5 others, marred by the loss of 2 dogs and an upset when crossing one of the great pressure ridges in the ice, had brought up more and more of the slate, and even I was interested by the profusion of evident fossil markings in their unbelievably ancient stratum. Those markings, however, were very primitive life forms involving no great paradox, except that any life forms should occur in rock. Hence, I still fail to see the good sense of Lake's demand for an interlude in our time-saving program. An interlude requiring the use of all 4 planes, many men, and the whole of the expedition's mechanical apparatus. I did not, in the end, veto the plan, though I decided not to accompany the northwestward party, despite Lake's plea for my geological advice. While they were gone, I would remain at the base with Peabody and 5 men and work out final plans for the eastward shift. In preparation for this transfer, one of the planes had begun to move up a good gasoline supply from McMurdo Sound, but this could wait temporarily. I kept with me 1 sledge and 9 dogs, since it is unwise to be at any time without possible transportation in an utterly deserted place. Lake's sub-expedition into the unknown, as everyone will recall, sent out its own reports from the shortwave transmitters on the plains, these being simultaneously picked up by our apparatus at the southern base and by the Arkham at McMurdo Sound, whence they were relayed to the outside world on wavelengths up to 50 meters. The start was made January 22nd at 4 a.m., and the first wireless message we received came only 2 hours later, when Lake spoke of descending and starting a small-scale ice melting and bore at a point some 300 miles away from us. 6 hours after that, a second and very excited message told of the frantic beaver-like work whereby a shallow shaft had been sunk and blasted, culminating in the discovery of slate fragments with several markings approximately like the one which had caused the original puzzlement. 3 hours later, a brief bulletin announced the resumption of the flight in the teeth of a raw and piercing gale, and when I dispatched a message of protest against further hazards, Lake replied curtly that his new specimens made any hazard worth taking. I saw that his excitement had reached the point of mutiny, and that I could do nothing to check this headlong risk of the whole expedition's success. But it was appalling to think of his plunging deeper and deeper into the treacherous and sinister immensity of tempests and unfathomed mysteries, which stretched off for some 1,500 miles to the half unknown, half suspected coastline of Queen Mary and Knox lands. Then, in about an hour and a half more, came the doubly excited message from Lake's moving plane, which almost reversed my sentiments and made me wish I had accompanied the party. 10:05 p.m. On the wing, after snowstorm, has spied mountain range ahead higher than any we've seen. May equal Himalayas, allowing for heights of plateau. Probable latitude 7615, longitude 11310 east. Reach as far as can see to right and left. Suspicion of 2 smoking cones. All peaks black and bare of snow. Gale blowing off them impedes navigation. After that, Pabadi, the men, and I hung breathlessly over the receiver. Thought of this titanic mountain rampart 700 miles away inflamed our deepest sense of adventure, and we rejoiced that our expedition, if not ourselves personally, had been its discoverers. In half an hour, Lake called us again. Moulton's plane forced down on plateau and foothills, but nobody hurt and perhaps can repair. Shall transfer essentials to other 3 for return, or further moves if necessary. But no more heavy plane travel needed just now. Hold on just a second, guys. I gotta get some drink. Okay, we're still. Mountains surpass anything in imagination. And going up scouting in Carol's plane, with all weighed out, you can't imagine anything like this. Highest peaks must go over 35,000 feet. Everest out of the running. Atwood to work out height with one of the guys when Carol and I go up. Probably wrong about cones for formations look stratified. Possibly slate with other strata mixed in. Odd skyline effects, regular sections of cubes clinging to the highest peaks. Whole thing marvelous in red gold light of low sun, like land of mystery in a dream or gateway to forbidden world of untrodden wonder. Wish you were here to study. Though it was technically sleeping time, not one of us listeners thought for a moment of retiring. It must have been a good deal, the same as McMurdo Sound, where the supply catch and the Arkham were also getting the messages, for Captain Douglas gave out a call congratulating everybody on the important find, and Sherman, the catch operator, seconded his sentiments. We were sorry, of course, about the damaged airplane, but hoped it could be easily mended. Then at 11 p.m. came another call from Lake. Up with Carol over highest foothills. Don't dare try really tall peaks in present weather, but shall later. Frightful work climbing and hard going at the altitude, but worth it. Great range, barely solid, hence can't get any glimpses beyond. Main summits exceed Himalayas, and very odd. Range looks like pre-Cambrian slate with plain signs of many other upheaved strata. Was wrong about volcanism. Goes farther in either direction than we can see. Swept clear of snow above about 21,000 feet. God, think of the nosebleeds you'd get. That would suck. Odd formations on the slopes of highest mountains. Great low square blocks with exactly vertical sides and rectangular lines of low vertical ramparts. Like the old castles clinging to the steep mountains and Roerich's paintings. God, I'm horrible. Impressive from distance. Flew close to some, and Carol thought they were formed of smaller separate pieces, but that is probably weathering. Most edges crumbled and rounded off as it exposed to storms and climate changes for millions of years. Parts, especially upper parts, seemed to be of lighter colored rock than any visible strata on slopes proper, hence an evidently crystalline origin. Close flying, many cave mouths, some unusually regular in outline, square or semicircle. You must come and investigate. Think I saw rampart squarely on top of one peak. Height seemed like 30,000 to 35,000 feet. Am up to 21,500 myself. In devilish gnawing cold, wind whistles and pipes through passes, and in and out of caves, but no flying danger so far. From then on, for another half hour, Lake kept up a running fire of comment and expressed his intention of climbing some of the peaks on foot. I replied that I would join him as soon as he could send a plane, and that Peabody and I would work out the best gasoline plan, just where and how to concentrate our supply in view of the expedition's altered character. Obviously, Lake's boring operations as well as his airplane activities would need a great deal delivered for the new base, which he was to establish at the foot of the mountains, and it was possible that the eastward flight might not be made after all this season. In connection with this business, I called Captain Douglas and asked him to get as much as possible out of the ships and up the barrier with the single dog team we had left there. A direct route across the unknown region between Lake and McMurdo Sound was what we really ought to establish. Lake called me later to say that he had decided to let the camp stay where Moulton's plane had been forced down, and where repairs had already progressed somewhat. The ice sheet was very thin, with dark ground here and there visible, and he would sink some borings and blast at the very point where making any sledge trips or climbing expeditions. He spoke of the majesty of the whole scene and the odd state of his sensations at being in the vast, silent pinnacles whose ranks shot up like a wall reaching the sky at the world's rim. Atwood's observations had placed the height of the 5 tallest peaks from 30,000 to 34,000 feet. The wind-swept nature of the terrain clearly disturbed Lake, for it argued the occasional existence of gales violent beyond anything we had so far encountered. His camp lay a little more than 5 miles from where the higher foothills abruptly rose. I could almost trace a note of subconscious alarm in his words, flashed across a glacial void of 700 miles. As he urged that we all hasten with the matter and get to the strange new region disposed of as soon as possible. He is about to rest now, after a continuous day's work of almost unparalleled speed, strenuousness, and results. In the morning, I had 3-cornered wireless talk with Lake and Captain Douglas at their widely separated bases, and it was agreed that one of Lake's planes would come to my base for Peabody, the 5 men, and myself, as well as for all the fuel it could carry. The rest of the fuel question, depending on our decision about an easterly trip, could wait for a few days, since Lake had enough for immediate camp heat and borings. Eventually, the old southern base ought to be restocked, but if we postponed the easterly trip, we would not use it till next summer. And meanwhile, Lake would send a plane to explore a direct route between his new mountains and McMurdo Sound. Peabody and I prepared to close our base for a short or long period, as the case might be. If we wintered in the Antarctic, we would probably fly straight from Lake's base to the Arkham without returning to this spot. Some of our tents had already been reinforced by blocks of hard snow, and now we decided to complete the job of making a permanent village, owing to a very liberal tent supply. Lake had with him all that his base would need even after our arrival. I wirelessed that Peabody and I would be ready for the northwestward move after 1 day's work and 1 night's rest. Our labors, however, were not very steady after 4 p.m., for about that time, day had started Since an airplane survey of the nearly exposed rock surfaces showed an entire absence of those for which he was looking, and which formed so great a part of the colossal peaks that looming up a tantalizing distance from the camp. Most of the rocks... my feet are asleep, hold on. Most of the rocks glimpsed were apparently Jurassic. Oh, Jesus. Hold on. Oh, my God. I looked up at the... I'm so tired. I'm so sorry. I looked up at the corner, and I thought it was a spider, like, because it's got little tentacles hanging over the page. I thought it was like a spider, and it freaked me the fuck out. Brain. Hold on just a second, chat. Hold on. Hold on just a second. Well, that looks stupid. Okay, I don't care. Hold on. Okay, sorry about that. I had a random Facebook message. I was like, I had to check it. Sandstones and Permian and Triassic, with now and then a glossy black outcropping suggesting a hard coal. This rather discouraged lake, whose plans all hinged on unearthing specimens more than 500 million years older. It was clear to him that in order to recover the vein in which he had found the odd markings, he would have to make a long sledge trip from these foothills to the steep slopes of the gigantic mountains themselves. He had resolved, nevertheless, to do some local boring as part of the expedition's general program, hence set up the drill and put 5 men to work with it, while the rest finished settling the camp and repairing the damaged airplane. The softest visible rock, a sandstone about a quarter of a mile from the camp, had been chosen for the first sampling, and the drill made excellent progress without much supplementary blasting. It was about 3 hours afterward, following the first really heavy blast of the operation, that the shouting of the drill crew was heard, and that young Gedney, the acting foreman, rushed into the camp with the startling news. They had struck a cave. Early in the boring, the sandstone had given place to a vein of limestone full of minute fossil cephalopods, corals, and other things I can't say, and with occasional suggestions of sponges and marine vertebrate bones, the latter probably of sharks and, gnoids. This in itself was important enough as affording the first vertebrate fossils the expedition had yet secured. But when shortly afterward the drill had dropped through the stratum into apparent vacancy, a wholly new and doubly intense wave of excitement spread among the excavators. A good-sized blast had laid open the subterranean secret, and now, through a jagged aperture, perhaps 5 feet across and 3 feet thick, there yawned before the avid searchers a section of shallow limestone, hollowing worn more than 50 million years ago by the trickling groundwaters of a bygone tropic world. The hollowed layer was not more than 7 or 8 feet deep, but extended off indefinitely in all directions and had a fresh, slightly moving air, which suggested its membership in an extensive subterranean system. Its roof and floor were abundantly equipped with large stalagmites. Oh my god, I'm so garbage at saying this. Stalagmites. I tried. Some of which met in column form, but important above all else was a vast deposit of shells and bones, which in places nearly choked the passage. Washed down from unknown jungles of I can say it. Yeah, I can't. I can say it in my brain. I can't actually pronunciate it. So that's cool. Comedian. Got to get comfort chat. Mesozoic, whatever. Tree ferns and fungi, and forest of fan palms and primitive other animals medley contain representatives of more I can't say any of these words. Animal species of the greatest paleontologists could have encountered or classified in a year. Mollusks, crustacean, got it. Armor, that was another word, was crustaceous. Fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and early mammals, great and small, known and unknown. No wonder Gedney ran back to the camp shouting, and no wonder everyone else dropped work and rushed headlong through the biting cold to where the tall derrick marked a new-found gateway to secrets of inner earth and vanished eons. When Lake had satisfied the first keen edge of his curiosity, he scribbled a message in his notebook and had young Moulton run back to the camp to dispatch it by wireless. This was my first word of the discovery, and it told of the identification of early shells, bones of ganoids, and remnants of great skull fragments, dinosaur vertebrae and armor plates, pterodactyl teeth and wing bones, debris, shark's teeth, primitive bird skulls and skulls, vertebrae, and other bones of archaic mammals, such as other things that I can't pronunciate. There were nothing as recent as a mastodon, elephant, true camel, deer, or bovine animal. Hence, Link concluded that the last deposits had occurred during the Other Age, and that hollowed stratum had lain in its present dry, dead, and inaccessible state for at least 30 million years. On the other hand, the prevalence of very early life forms were singular in the highest degree, though the limestone formation was, on the evidence of such typical embedded fossils, positively and unmistakably, and not a particle earlier. The free fragments in the hollow space included a surprising proportion from organisms considered as peculiar to far older periods, even rudimentary fishes, mollusks, and coral, as remote as this other time periods that I'm not actually going to be able to pronunciate. The inevitable inference was that in this part of the world there had been a remarkable and unique degree of continuity between the life of over 300 million years ago and that of only 30 million years ago. How far this continuity has extended beyond the age when the cavern was closed was of course past all speculation. In any event, the coming of the frightful ice in the some 500,000 years ago, a mere yesterday as compared with the age of this cavity, must have put an end to any of the primal forms which had locally managed to outlive their common terms. Lake was not content to let his first message stand, but had another bulletin written and dispatched across the snow to the camp before Moulton could get back. After that, Moulton stayed at the wireless in one of the planes, transmitting to me and to the Arkham for relaying to the outside world the frequent postscripts which Lake sent him by a succession of messengers. Those who followed the newspapers will remember the excitement created among men of science by that afternoon's reports which have finally led, after all these years, to the organization of that very stark weather Moor expedition which I am so anxious to dissuade from its purposes. I had better give the messages literally as Lake sent them and as our base operator translated them from his pencil shorthand. Fowler makes discovery of highest importance in sandstone and limestone fragments from blasts. Several distinct triangular prints like those in the slate, proving that source survived from over 600 million years ago, without more than moderate morphological changes and decrease in average size. Prints apparently more primitive or decandent, decandent, if anything, than older ones. Emphasize importance of discovery in press will mean to biology what Einstein had meant to mathematics and physics, joins up with my previous work and amplifies conclusions. Appears to indicate, as I suspected, that Earth has been a whole cycle or cycles of organic life before known ones that began with cells, was evolved and specialized not later than 1,000 million years ago, when planet was young and recently uninhabitable for any life forms or notable. Oh, we could do that. Well, I had an idea. I'm sorry. I can spell. Okay. Sorry, I had an idea. Questions arises when, where, and how development took place. Later, examining certain skeletal fragments of large land and marine and primitive mammals, find singular local wounds or injuries to bony structure, not attributable to any known predatory or carnivorous animal of any period. Of two sorts, straight penetrant bores and apparently hacking incisions. One or two cases of cleanly severed bone, not only specimens affected. I'm sending to camp for electric torches. Flashlights. They're called flashlights, chat. Electric torches. Flashlights. I love it. We'll extend search area underground by hacking away the other one that's not stalagmites or stalactites. Whatever. I don't care anymore. Still later, have found peculiar soapstone fragment about 6 inches across and an inch and a half thick, wholly unlike any visible formation, greenish, but no evidences to place its period. Has curious smoothness and regularity, shaped like 5-pointed star with tips broken off. One second, I need to figure out. Let me just start this one again. In signs of other cleavage at inward angles and in center of surface, small smooth depression in center of unbroken surface. Arouses much curiosity as to source and weathering, probably some freak of water action. Carroll, with magnifier, thinks he can make out additional markings of geologic significance. Groups of tiny dots in regular patterns. Dogs growing uneasy as we work and seem to hate this soapstone. Must see if it has any peculiar odor. We'll report again when Mills gets back with light and we start on underground area. 10:15 p.m. Important discovery. Orendorff and Watkins. That's a last name. Working underground at 9:45 with light. Found monstrous barrel-shaped fossil of wholly unknown nature. Probably vegetable unless overgrown specimen of unknown marine data. Tissue evidently preserved by mineral salts. Tough as leather, but astonishing flexibility retained in places. Marks of broken off parts at ends and around sides. 6 feet end to end. 3.5 feet central diameter. Tapering to 1 foot at each end. Like a barrel. With 5 bulging ridges in places of staves? Lateral breakages as of thinnish stalks are at equator and middle of these ridges. And furrows between ridges are curious growths, combs, or wings. This is actually Cthulhu. My knee hurts. Okay. combs or wings that fold up and spread out like fans, all greatly damaged but one, which gives almost 7-foot wingspan. Arrangement reminds me what of the certain monsters of primal myth, especially fabled elder things in the Necronomicon. These wings seem to be membranous, stretched on framework of glandular tubing, apparent minute orifices and frame tubing at wingtips, ends of body shriveled, giving no clue to interior or to what had been broken off there. Must dissect when we get back to camp. Can't decide whether vegetable or animal. Many features. If it's got wings, why is it vegetable? Many features, obviously, of almost incredible primitiveness, have set all hands cutting stalactites and looking for further specimens. Additional scarred bones found, but these must wait. Having trouble with dogs, they can't endure the new specimen and would probably tear it to pieces if we didn't keep it at a distance from them. 11:30 p.m. Attention, Dyer, Peabody, Douglas, matter of highest, I might say transcendent importance. Arkham must relay to Kingsport Head Station at once. Strange barrel growth is the thing that left prints in rocks. Mills, Burdeau, and Fowler discovered a cluster of 13 more at underground point, 40 feet from aperture, mixed with curiously rounded and configured soapstone fragments, smaller than one previously found, star-shaped, but no marks of breakage, except at some of the points of organic specimens. 8 apparently perfect, with all appendages. Have brought all to surface, leading off dogs to distance. They cannot stand the things. Give the close attention to description and repeat back for accuracy. For accuracy, papers must get this right. Objects are 8 feet long all over. 6'5" rigid barrel torso. Jesus. Thing's huge. 3.5 feet central diameter. 1 foot in diameters. Dark gray, flexible and infinitely tough. 7-foot membranous wings of same color, found folded, spread out of furrows between ridges. Wing framework tubular or glandular of lighter gray with orifices at wingtips. Spread wings have serrated edges. Around equator, one at central apex of each of the 5 vertical stave-like ridges are 5 systems of light gray flexible arms or tentacles. It's Cthulhu, chat. It's Cthulhu. Like arms of primitive crinoid? Single stalks, 3 inches diameter, branch after 6 inches into 5 substalks, each of which branches after 8 inches into 5 small, tapering tentacles or tendrils, giving each stalk a total of 25 tentacles. Damn, that's a lot of tentacles. At top of torso, blunt neck of lighter gray with gill-like suggestions, holds yellowish 5-pointed starfish-shaped apparent head covered with 3-inch wiry, I don't know what this is, various prismatic colors. Head thick and puffy, about 2 feet point to point, with 3-inch flexible yellow tubes projecting from each point. Slit in exact center of top, probably breathing aperture. At end of each tube is spherical expansion, where yellowish membrane rolls back on handling to reveal glassy, red irised globe, evidently an eye. 5 slightly longer reddish tubes start from inner angles of starfish-shaped head. I don't remember Cthulhu having a star-shaped head, though. And found folded tightly down. Tubes and points clinging to the bulbous neck and torso. Flexibility surprising despite fast toughness. At bottom of torso, rough but dissimilarly functioning counterparts of head arrangements exist. Bulbous light gray pseudo-neck without gills suggestion holds greenish 5-pointed starfish arrangement. Tough, muscular arms, 4 feet long and tapering from 7 inches diameter at base to about 2.5 at point. To each point is attached a small end of a greenish, 5-veined, membranous triangle, 8 inches long and 6 wide at farther end. This is the paddle, fin or pseudo-foot, which had made prints in rocks from 1,000 million to 50 or 60 million years old. From inner angles of starfish arrangement, project 2-foot reddish tubes tapering from 3 inches diameter at base to 1 at tip. Orifices at tips. All these parts are infinitely tough and leathery, but extremely flexible. 4-foot arms with paddles, undoubtedly used for locomotion of some sort, marine or otherwise. When moved, display suggestions of exaggerated muscularity. As found, all these projections tightly folded over pseudo neck and end of torso, corresponding to projections at other ends. I'm going to say this right now, as I take a minute. Somebody who can draw from this is absolutely fantastic, because I don't know what the hell they're talking about. Cannot yet assign positively to animal or vegetable king. Oh wait, that's not where we're at. Yes, that's where we're at. Cannot yet assign positively to animal or vegetable kingdom, but odds now favor animal. Probably represent incredibly advanced evolution, without loss of certain primitive features. Resemblances unmistakable despite local contradictory evidence. Wing structure puzzles in view of probable marine habitat, but may have use in water navigation. Symmetry is curiously vegetable-like, suggesting vegetables essentially up and down structure, rather than animals fore and aft structure. Fabulously early state of evolution, preceding even simplest... baffles all conjecture as to origin. Complete specimens have such uncanny resemblance to certain creatures of primal myth that suggestions of ancient existence outside Antarctic becomes inevitable. Dyer and Peabody have read Necronomicon and seen Clark Ashton Smith's nightmare paintings based on texts, and will understand when I speak of elder things supposed to have created all Earth's life as jest or mistake. Students have always thought conception formed from morbid imaginative treatment of very ancient things, also like prehistoric folklore, things Wilmarth have spoken of, Cthulhu cult appendages, etc. Vast fields of study open, deposits probably of late Cretaceous or early period, judging from associated specimens. Massively stalagmites deposited above them, hard work hewing out, but toughness prevented damage. State of preservation miraculous, evidently owing to limestone action. No more found so far, but we'll resume search later. Job now to get 14 huge specimens to camp without dogs, which bark furiously and can't be trusted near them. With 9 men, 3 left to guard the dogs, we ought to manage. Okay. We ought to manage the 3 sledges fairly well. Though wind is bad, must establish plain communication with McMurdo Sound and begin shipping material. But I've got to dissect one of these things before we take any rest. Which I wish I had a real library here. Dyer better kick himself for having tried to stop my westward trip. First the world's greatest mountains, and then this. If this lasts, is it the high spot of the expedition? I don't know what is. We're made scientifically. Congrats, Peabody, on the drill that opened up the cave. Now with Arkham, please repeat description. The sensations of Peabody and myself at receipt of this report were almost beyond description, nor were our companions much behind us in enthusiasm. McTeague, who had hastily translated a few high spots as they came from the drone receiving set, wrote out the entire message from his shorthand version. As soon as Lake's operator signed off, all appreciated the making significance of the discovery, and I sent Lake congratulations as soon as the Arkham's operator had repeated back the descriptive parts as requested. And my example was followed by Sherman from the station at the McMurdo Sound Supply Catch, as well as by Captain Douglas of the Arkham. Later, as head of the expedition, I added some remarks to be relayed through the Arkham to the outside world, of course. Rest was absurd through amidst this excitement, and my only wish was to get to Lake's camp as quickly as I could. It disappointed me when he sent word that a rising mountain gale made early aerial travel impossible. But within an hour and a half, interest again rose to banish disappointment. Lake was sending more messages until the completely successful transportation of the 14 great specimens to the camp. It had been a hard pull, for the things were surprisingly heavy, but 9 men had accomplished it very neatly. Some of the party were hurriedly building a snow corral at a safe distance from the camp, to which the dogs could be brought for greater convenience in feeding. The specimens were laid out on the hard snow near the camp, save for one on which Lake was making crude attempts at dissection. This dissection seemed to be a greater task than had been expected, for despite the heat of a gasoline stove in the newly raised laboratory tent, the deceptively flexible tissue of the chosen specimen, a powerful and intact one, lost nothing of their more than leathery toughness. Lake was puzzled as to how he might make the incisions without violence destructive enough to upset all the structural niceties he was looking for. He had, it was true, 7 more perfect specimens out there, were too few to use up recklessly unless the cave might later yield an unlimited supply. Accordingly, he removed the specimens and dragged in one which, though having remnants of the starfish arrangements at both ends, was badly crushed and partly disrupted along one of the great torso furrows. Results quickly reported over the wireless were baffling and provocative indeed. Nothing like delicacy or accuracy was possible, with instruments hardly able to cut the tissue, but the little that was achieved left us all awed and bewildered. Existing biology would have to be wholly revised, for this thing was no product of any cell growth science knows about. There had been scarcely any mineral replacement, and despite an age of perhaps 40 million years, the internal organs were wholly intact. The leathery and almost indestructible quality was an inherent attribute of the thing's form of organization, and pertained to some cycle of invertebrate evolution utterly beyond our powers of speculation. At first, all that Lake found was dry, but as the heated tent procured its thawing effect, organic moisture of pungent and offensive odor was encountered toward the thing's uninjured side. It was not blood, but a thick, dark green fluid apparently answering the same purpose. By the time Lake reached this stage, all 37 dogs had been brought to the still uncompleted corral near the camp, and even at the distance set up a savage barking and show of relentlessness at the diffusive smell. Far from helping to place the strange entity, this provisional dissection merely deepened its mystery. All guesses about its external members had been correct, and all the evidence of these one could hardly hesitate to call the thing animal, but internal inspection brought up so many vegetable evidences that Lake was left hopelessly at sea. It had digestion and circulation and eliminated waste matter through the reddish tubes of its starfish-shaped base. Curiously, I think they spelled curiously wrong. I think they did. One would say that its respiratory apparatus handled oxygen rather than carbon dioxide, and there were odd evidences of air storage chambers and and methods of shifting respiration from the external orifice to at least 2 other fully developed breathing systems, gills and pores. Clearly, it was amphibian, and probably adapted to long, airless hibernation periods as well. Vocal organs seemed present and connect with the main respiratory system, but they presented anomalies beyond immediate solution. Articulate speech in the sense of syllable utterance seemed barely conceivable, but musical piping notes covering a wide range were highly probable. The muscular system was almost naturally developed. The nervous system was so complex and highly developed as to leave Lake aghast. Though excessively primitive and archaic in some respects, the thing had a set of ganglion centers and connectives arguing the very extremes of specialized development. Its 5-lobe brain was surprisingly advanced, and there were signs of a sensory equipment, served in part through the wiry cilia of the head, involving factors alien to any other terrestrial organism. Probably, it had more than 5 senses, so that its habits could not be predicted from any existing analogy. It must, Lake thought, have been a creature of keen sensitiveness and delicately differentiated functions in its primal world, much like the ants and bees of today. It reproduced like the vegetable cryptogams? Especially having spore cases at the tips of the wings and evidently developing from a thallus or prothallus. But to give it a name at this stage was mere folly. It looked like a radiate, but was clearly something more. It was partly vegetable, but had 3/4 of the essentials of animal structure. Then it was marine in origin and symmetrical, contour and certain other attributes clearly indicated. Yet one could not be exact as the limits of its later adaptations. The wings, after all, held a persistent suggestion of the aerial. How it could have undergone its tremendously complex evolution on a newborn Earth in time to leave prints and rocks was so far beyond conception as to make Lake whimsically recall the primal myths about great old ones who filtered down from the stars and concocted Earth life as a joke or a mistake, and the wild tales of cosmic kill-things from outside told by a folklorist colleague in Miss Atonic's English department. We all remember him. My nose is stuffy. Naturally, he considered the possibility of the prints having been made by a less evolved ancestor of the present specimens, but quickly rejected this theory upon considering the advanced structural qualities of the older fossils. If anything, the later contours decadence rather than higher evolution. The size of the pseudo-feet had decreased, and the whole morphology seemed coarsened and simplified. Moreover, the nerves and organs just examined held singular suggestions of retrogression from forms still more complex. Parts were surprisingly prevalent. Altogether, little could be said to have been involved, and Lake fell back on mythology for a provisional name, jocosely dubbing his finds the Elder Ones. Hold on just a second. I'm gonna get some water, and I gotta wipe my nosy. My nosy's running. At about 2:30 a.m., having decided to postpone further work and get a little rest, he covered the dissected organism with a tarp? Is that the real name for a tarp? My god. Nice. Emerged from the laboratory tent and studied the intact specimens with renewed interest. The ceaseless Antarctic sun had begun to limber up their tissues a trifle so that the head points and tubes of 2 or 3 signs of unfolding, but Lake did not believe there was any danger of immediate decomposition in the almost sub-zero air. He did, however, move all the undissected specimens closer together and throw a spare tent over them in order to keep off the direct solar rays. That would also help to keep the possible scent away from the dogs, also whose hostile unrest was really becoming a problem, even at their substantial distance and behind the higher and higher snowballs, which the increased quota of the men were hastening to raise around their quarters. He had to weight down the corners of the tent cloth with heavy blocks of snow to hold it in place amidst the rising gale, for the Titan mountain seemed about to deliver some gravely severe blasts. Early apprehensions about sudden Antarctic winds were revived, and under Atwood's supervision, precautions were taken to bank the tents, new dog corral, and crude airplane shelters with snow on the mountainward side. These latter shelters begun with hard snow blocks during odd moments were by no means as high as they should have been, and Lake finally detached all hands from other tasks to work on them. It was after 4 when Lake had at last prepared to sign off and advised us all to share the rest period his outfit would take when the shelter walls were a little higher. He held some friendly chat with Peabody over the other and repeated his praise of the really marvelous drills that had helped him make his discovery. Atwood also sent greetings and praises. I gave Lake a warm word of congratulation, owning up that he was right about the western trip, and we all agreed to get in touch by wireless at 10 in the morning. If the gale was then over, Lake would send a plane for the party at my base. Just before retiring, I dispatched a final message to the Arkham with instructions about toning down the day's news for the outside world, since the full details seemed radical enough to rouse a wave of incredulity until further substantiated. Ha! Got it. Get some more water. I don't know how many pages we have left. A lot. We have a fucking lot. We have over... We still have about 70 pages to go. So, it's gonna be in a whole stream to do this. Chapter 3. None of us, I imagine, slept very heavily or continuously that morning, for both the excitement of Lake's discovery and the mounting fury of the wind were against such a thing. So savage was the blast, even where we were, that we could not help wondering how much worse it was at Lake's camp, directly under the vast unknown peaks that bred and delivered it. McTeague was awake at 10 o'clock and tried to get Lake on the wireless as agreed, but some electrical condition in the disturbed air to the westward seemed to prevent communication. We did, however, get the Arkham, and Douglas told me that he had likewise been vainly trying to reach Lake. He had known about the wind, for very little was blowing at McMurdo Sound, despite its persistent rage where we were. Throughout the day, we all listened anxiously and tried to get Lake at intervals, but invariably without results. About noon, a positive frenzy of wind stampeded out of the west, causing us to fear for the safety of our camp, but it eventually died down with only a moderate relapse at 2 p.m. After 3 o'clock, it was very quiet, and we redoubled our efforts to get Lake, reflecting that he had 4 planes, each provided with an excellent shortwave outfit. We could not imagine any ordinary accident capable of crippling all his wireless equipment at once. Nevertheless, the stony silence continued, and when we thought of the delirious force the wind must have had in the locality, we could not help making the worst direful conjectures. By 6 o'clock, our fears had become intense and definite, and after a wireless consultation with Douglas and Thorpe, I'm going to call him Thorpe because I don't know how to say his name, I resolved to take steps toward investigation. The 5th airplane, which we had left at the McMurdo Sound Supply catch with Sherman and two sailors, was in good shape and ready for instant use. And it seemed that the very emergency for which it had been saved was now upon us. I got Sherman by wireless and ordered him to join me with the plane and the 2 sailors at the southern base as quickly as possible. the air conditions being apparently highly favorable. We then talked over the personnel of the coming investigation party and decided that we would include all hands, together with the sledge and dogs which I had kept with me. Even so great a load would not be too much for one of the huge planes built to our special orders for heavy machinery transportation. At intervals, I still tried to reach Lake with the wireless, but all to no purpose. Sherman, with the sailors, Gunner, and Larson took off at 7:30 and reported a quiet flight and several points on the wing. They arrived at our base at midnight, and all hands at once discussed the next move. It was risky business sailing over the Antarctic in a singular airplane without any line of bases, but no one drew back from what seemed like the plainest necessity. We turned in at 2 o'clock for a brief rest after some preliminary loading on the plane, but we're up again in 4 hours to finish the loading and packing. At 7:15 a.m., January 25th, we started flying northwestward under McTeague's pilotage with 10 men, 7 dogs, a sledge, a fuel and food supply, and other items including the plane's wireless outfit. The atmosphere was clearly fairly quiet and relatively mild in temperature, and we anticipated very little trouble in reaching the latitude and longitude designated by Lake as the site of his camp. Our apprehensions were over when we might find, or fail to find, at the end of our journey. For silence continued to answer all our calls dispatched to the camp. Every incident of that 4.5-hour flight is burned into my recollection because of its crucial position in my life. It marked my loss at the age of 54 of all the peace and balance which the normal mind possesses, though through its accustomed conception of external nature and nature's laws. Thenceforward, the 10 of us, but the student Danforth and myself above all others, were to face a hideously amplified world of lurking horrors which nothing can erase from our emotions, and which we would refrain from sharing with mankind in general if we could. The newspapers have printed the bulletins we sent from the moving plane, telling of our non-stop course, our 2 battles with treacherous upper air gales, our glimpse of the broken surface where Lake had sunk his mid-journey 3 days before, and our sight of a group of those strange fluffy snow cylinders noted by Amundsen and Bird as rolling in the wind across the endless leagues of frozen plateau. There came a point, though, when our sensations could not be conveyed in any words the press would understand, and a later point when we had to adopt an actual rule of strict censorship. The sailor Larson was first to spy the jagged line of witch-like cones and pinnacles ahead, and his shouts sent everyone to the windows of the great cabin plane. Despite our speed, they were very slow in gaining prominence, hence we knew that they must be infinitely far off, invisible only because of their abnormal height. Little by little, however, they rose grimly into the western sky, allowing us to distinguish various bare, bleak, blackish summits, and to catch the curious sense of fantasy which they inspired as seen as in the reddish Antarctic light against the provocative background of iridescent ice dust clouds. In the whole spectacle there was a persistent, pervasive hint of stupendous secrecy and potential revelation, as if these stark nightmare spires marked with the pylons of a frightful gateway into forbidden spheres of dream and complex gulfs of remote time, space, and ultra-dimensionality. I could not help feeling that they were evil things, mountains of madness, whose farther slopes looked out over some accursed ultimate abyss. That seething half-luminous cloud background held ineffable suggestions of a vague ethereal beyondness, far more than terrestrially spatial, and gave appalling reminders of the utter remoteness, separateness, desolation, and long death of this untrodden and unfathomed world. It was young Danforth who drew our notice to the curious regularities of the higher mountain skyline, regularities like clinging fragments of perfect cubes which Lincoln mentioned in his message, at which indeed justifies his comparison with the dreamlike suggestions of primordial temple ruins on cloudy mountaintops, so subtly and strangely painted by I'm 90% sure I'm saying his name wrong. There was indeed something hauntingly Rorik-like about the whole unearthly continent of mountainous mystery. I had felt it in October when we first caught sight of Victoria Land, and I felt it afresh now. I felt, too, another wave of uneasy consciousness of mythical resemblance, of how disturbingly this lethal realm corresponds to the evilly famed plateau in the primal writings. Mythologists have placed Lang in Central Asia, but the okay, I think this is gonna be fun. But the racial memory of man, or of his predecessors, is long, and it may well be that certain tales have come down from lands and mountains and temples of horror earlier than Asia and earlier than any human world we known. That's not helpful at all. Oh my god, my nose. A few daring mystics have hinted at a origin for the fragmentary manuscripts and have suggested that the devotees were as alien to mankind as itself. Wherever in space or time it might brood, but not a region I would care to be in or near. Nor did I relish the proximity of a world that had ever bred such ambiguous and monstrosities as those Lake had just mentioned. At the moment, I felt... Oh my god, I just dropped this. I felt sorry that I had ever read the abhorrent Necronomicon, or talked so much with that unpleasantly folklorist Wilmars at the university. Hey, Wilmars, we know him. This mood undoubtedly served to aggravate my reaction to the bizarre mirage which burst upon us from the increasingly opulent zenith as we drew near the mountains and began to make out the cumulative undulations of the foothills. I have seen dozens of polar mirages during the preceding weeks, some of them quite uncanny and fantastically vivid at the present sample. But this one had a wholly novel and obscure quality of menacing symbolism, and I shuddered as a seething labyrinth of fabulous walls and tower loomed out of the troubled ice vapors above our heads. Hold on just a second. I'm gonna get some water really quickly. Okay. The effect was that of a cyclopean city of no architecture known to man or to human imagination, with vast aggregations of masonry embodying monstrous preservations of geometrical laws and attaining the most grotesque extremes of sinister bizarrerie. There were cones, sometimes terraced or fluted, surmounted by tall cylinders, shafts here and there, enlarged and often capped with tiers of finished scalloped discs, in strange beetling table-like construction, suggesting piles of rectangular slabs or circular plates or five-pointed stars, with each one overlapping the one beneath. There was composite cones and pyramids, either alone or surmounting cylinders, or cubes or flatter cones and pyramids, and occasional needle-like spires and curious clusters of five. All of these structures seemed knit together by tubular bridges crossing from one to the other at various dizzying heights, and the implied scale of the whole was terrifying and oppressive in its sheer giganticism. The general type of mirage was not like some of the wilder forms observed and drawn by the Arctic whaler Scoresby in 1820. But at the time and place, with those dark, unknown mountain peaks soaring stupendously ahead, that elder work discovery in our minds, and the pall of probable disaster enveloping the greater part of our expedition, we all seemed to find it a taint of malignity and infinitely evil portent. I was glad when the mirage began to break up, though in the process the various nightmare turrets and cones assumed distorted temporary forms of even vaster hideousness. As the whole illusion dissolved to churning opalescence, we began to look earthward again. Earthward? I don't know. And so that our journey's end was not far off. The unknown mountains ahead rose dizzyingly, up like a fearsome of giants, with curious regularities, shewing with startling clearness, even without a field glass. We were over the lowest foothills now, and we could see amidst the snow, ice, and bare patches of their main plateau a couple of darkest spots, which we took to be Lakes Camp and Boring. The higher foothills shot up between 5 and 6 miles away, forming a range almost distinct from the terrifying line of more than Himalayan peaks beyond them. At length, Ropes, the student who had relieved McTeague at the controls, began to head downward toward the left-hand dark spot, whose size marked it as a camp. As he did so, McTeague sent out the last uncensored wireless message the world was to receive from our expedition. Everyone, of course, has read the brief and unsatisfying bulletins of the rest of our Antarctic journey. Some hours after our landing, we sent a guarded report of the tragedy we found, and reluctantly announced the wiping out of the whole lake party. What? Oh my god. By the frightful wind of the preceding day, or of the night before that, 11 known dead, young Gendy missing. People pardon our hazy lack of details through realization of the shock the sad event must have caused us, and believed us when we explained that the mangling action of the wind had rendered all 11 bodies unsuitable for transportation. Hey, Chewie. Yup, story time with ZD. I'm reading H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. It's pretty crazy. We just got past really the boring stuff and getting to the good stuff now. But the wiping out of the whole lake party by the frightful wind of the preceding day, or of the night before that. 11 known dead, young Gendy missing. People pardon our hazy lack of details through realization of the shock the sad event must have caused us, and believed us when we explained that the mangling action of the wind had rendered all 11 bodies unsuitable for transportation outside. Indeed, I flatter myself that even in the midst of our distress, under bewilderment and soul-clutching horror, we scarcely went beyond the truth in any specific instance. The tremendous significance lies in what we dared not tell, what I would not tell now, but for the need of warning others off from nameless terrors. It is a fact that the wind had wrought dreadful havoc. Whether all could have lived through it, even without the other thing, is gravely open to doubt. The storm, with its fury of madly driven ice particles, must have been beyond anything our expedition had encountered before. One airplane shelter, all it seems has been left in far too flimsy and inadequate state, was nearly pulverized, and the derrick at the distant Boring was entirely shaken to pieces. The exposed metal of the grounded planes and drilling machinery was bruised into high polish, and 2 of the small tents were flattened despite their snow banking. Wooden surfaces left out in the blast were pitted, and the paint was gone, and all signs of tracks in the snow were completely obliterated. Obliterated, yeah, okay. It is also true that we found none of the biological objects in a condition to take outside as a whole. We did gather some minerals from a vast tumbled pile, including several of the greenish soapstone fragments, whose odd five-pointed rounding and point patterns of grouped dots caused so many doubtful comparisons, and some fossil bones, among which were the most typical of the curiously injured specimens. Hey Noodle, I'm doing good today. How are you? I'm just reading to you guys. We're reading H.P. Lovecraft. But Chewy, how are you doing today? I'm sorry, I forgot to ask. And Noodle, how are you doing? I'm kind of in a bad mood. I'm getting out of it, but I did not get to wake up in a good mood today. No, didn't say anything. Hold on. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. But yeah, how are you guys doing? None of the dogs survived. Aw, their hurriedly built snow enclosure near the camp being almost wholly destroyed. The wind may have done that, though the greater breakage on the side next to the camp, which was not the windward one, suggests an outward leap or break of the frantic beasts themselves. All three sledges were gone, and we have tried to explain that the wind may have blown them off into the unknown. The drill and ice melting machinery at the boring were too badly damaged to warrant salvage, so we used them to choke up that subtly disturbing gateway to the past, which land had blasted. We likewise left at the camp, the two most shaken up the plains. Since our surviving party had 4 real pilots, Sherman, Danforth, McTeague, and Ropes and all, with Danforth in a poor nervous shape to navigate, we brought back all the books, scientific equipment, and other incidentals we could find, though much was rather unaccountably blown away. Spare tents and furs were either missing or badly out of condition. Interesting. Man, that's... Oof. It's not a lot of sleep there, Noodle. Woke up at 6 a.m. and went to bed at 2 a.m. Oof. Oh, you keep putting 8 a.m. So you went to bed at 2 a.m. and woke up at 8 a.m.? Oof. It was approximately 4 p.m. after wide plain cruising had forced us to give Genly up for lost, and we sent our guarded message to the Arkham for relaying, and I think we did well to keep it as calm and non-committal as we succeeded in doing. The most we said about agitation concerned our dogs, whose frantic uneasiness near the biological specimen was to be expected from poor Lake's accounts. We did not mention, I think, their display of the same uneasiness when sniffing around the odd greenish soapstones and certain other objects in the disordered region, objects including scientific instruments, airplanes, and machinery both at the camp and at the boring, whose parts had been loosened, moved, or otherwise tampered with by winds that must have harbored singular curiosity and investigativeness. About the 14 biological specimens, we were pardonably indefinite. We said that the only ones we discovered were damaged, but that enough was left of them to prove Lake's description wholly and impressively accurate. It was hard work keeping our personal emotions out of this matter, and we did not mention numbers or say exactly how we had found those which we did find. We had by that time agreed not to transmit anything suggesting madness on the part of Lake's men, and it surely looked like madness to find 6 imperfect monstrosities carefully buried upright in 9-foot snow graves under 5-pointed mounds punched over the groups of dots and patterns exactly like those of the odd greenish soapstones dug up from the Mesozoic times. The 8 perfect specimens mentioned by Lake seem to have been completely blown away. What type of book am I reading? Noodle, I'm reading H.P. Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness. He is very much known for his horror work. I have to be super careful because he's also big fat racist. So there's that. So you have to be like super careful when reading his books. But the horror is really good, and he's the one that basically started the Cthulhu mythos. Yeah. He's the one that basically started all of like anything that's to do with Cthulhu. He's the one that started it. And they're very good. Like, you don't see writers writing the way that he does. Obviously not the racism part, but the horror part. You just don't see the detail much anymore like he does in a lot of works. The what? Cthulhu? Oh, you're asking Cthulhu in the Necronomicon. His name is Cthulhu. Let me type it. Cthulhu. It's very, I guess to say maybe, like cultish. Like, kind of. There's been cults based on it. I played a game, about Cthulhu. It was very good. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff based upon Cthulhu and the mythos and like H.P. Lovecraftians and stuff like that. It's a very big thing, but it's also very, I think, like a cult classic kind of thing. So there's that, but they're very good stories, except for the whole racism part, obviously. Yeah, okay, so I didn't know, like, okay, so if you've ever played Terraria, Cthulhu is in Terraria. I called him Chalupa. I didn't know how to say his name, so I just called him Chalupa for like 2 years, until I heard someone say Cthulhu, and then that's how I learned how to say it. Yeah, it's just Cthulhu. We were careful too about the public's general peace of mind. Hence, Danforth and I said little about that frightful trip over the mountains the next day. It was the fact that only a lightened plane could possibly cross a range of such height, which mercifully limited that scouting tour to the two of us. On our return at 1 a.m., Danforth was close to hysterics, but kept an admirably stiff upper lip. It took no persuasion to make him promise not to show our sketches and the other things we brought away in our pockets, not to say anything more to the others that what we had agreed to relay outside, and to hide our camera films for private development later on, so that part of my present story will be as new to Peabody, McTeague, Ropes, Sherman, and the rest of us. It will be to the world in general. Indeed, Danforth is closer mouthed than I, and for he saw, or thinks he saw, one thing he will not tell even me. As all know, our report included a tale of hard ascent, a confirmation of Lake's opinion that the Great Peaks are of Arcanian slate, and other very primal crumpled strata, unchanged since at least Middle times, a conventional comment on the regularity of the clinging cube and rampart formations, a decision that the cave mouths indicate dissolved veins, a conjecture that certain slopes and passes would permit of the scaling and crossing of the entire range by seasoned mountaineers, and a remark that the mysterious other side holds a lofty and immense super plateau as ancient and unchanging as the mountain themselves, 20,000 feet in elevation, with grotesque rock formations protruding through a thin glacial layer, and with low gradual foothills between the general plateau surface and the sheer of the highest peaks. This body of data is in every aspect true so far as it goes, and it has completely satisfied the men at the camp. We laid our absence of 16 hours, a longer time than our announced flying, landing, and rock collecting program called for, to a long mythical spell of adverse wind conditions, and told truly of our landing on the farther foothills. Fortunately, our tale sounded realistic and prosaic, enough to tempt any of the others into emulating our flight. Had any tried to do that, I would have used every ounce of my persuasion to stop them, and I do not know what Danforth would have done. While we were gone, Peabody, Sherman, Ropes, McTeague, and Williamson had worked like beavers over Lake's two best planes, fitting them again for use to despite the altogether unaccountable juggling of their operative mechanism. We decided to load all the planes the next morning and start back for our old base as soon as possible, even though indirect there was the safest way to work toward McMurdo Sound, for a straight line flight across the most utterly unknown stretches.
Rule number 22. When in doubt, know your way out.
Oh my god. You scared of me. Thank you, Mobile. I will hydrate. Let me just finish this thing and I'll hydrate. Across the most utterly unknown stretches of the continent would involve many additional hazards. Further exploration was hardly feasible in view of our tragic decimation and the ruin of our drilling machinery, and the doubts and horrors around us, which we did not reveal, made us wish only to escape from the world of desolation and brooding madness as swiftly as we could. As the public knows, our return to the world was accomplished without further disasters. All planes reached the old base on the evening of the next day, January 27th, after a swift, non-stop flight, and on the 28th we made McMurdo Sound in 2 laps. The one pause being very brief and occasioned by a faulty rudder and the furious wind over the ice shelf after we had cleared the great plateau. In 5 days more, the Arkham and Miskatonic, with all hands and equipment on board, were shaking clear of the thickening field ice and working up Ross Sea with the mocking mountains of Victoria Land looming westward against the troubled Antarctic sky and twisting the wind wails into a wide-range musical piping which chilled my soul to the quick. Less than a fortnight later, we left the last hint of polar land behind us, and thanked heaven that we were clear of a haunted, accursed realm where life and death, space and time, had made blasphemous alliances in the unknown epochs since matter first withered and swam on the planet's scarce cooled crust. Alright, Noodle, thank you so much for that lurk. I appreciate it. You'll try and be back soon? You're all good. I'll be here reading for the next probably 2 hours because we have about 60 pages left to go. So, yeah. I'll be here. Since our return, we have all constantly worked to discourage Antarctic exploration and have kept certain doubts and guesses to ourselves with splendid unity and faithfulness. Even young Danforth, with his nervous breakdown, had not flinched or babbled to his doctors. Indeed, as I have said, there is one thing he thinks he alone saw, which he will not tell even me, though I think it would help his psychological state if he would consent to do so. It might explain and relieve much, though perhaps the thing was no more than a delusional aftermath of an earlier shock. That is the impression I gathered after those rare, irresponsible moments when he whispers disjointed things to me, things which he ruminates vehemently as soon as he gets a grip on himself again. It'll be hard work deterring others from the great white South, as some of our efforts may directly harm our cause by drawing inquiring notice. We might have known from the first that human curiosity is undying, and that the results we announced would be enough to spur others ahead of the same age-long pursuit of the unknown. Lake's reports of those biological monstrosities had aroused naturalists and paleontologists of the highest pitch, though we were sensible enough not to show the detached parts we had taken from the actual buried specimen of our photographs of these specimens as they were found. We also refrained from showing the more puzzling of the sacred bones and greenish soapstones, where Danforth and I have closely guarded the pictures we took, or drew of the super plateau across the range, and the crumpled things we smooth studied in terror and brought away in our pockets. But now that stark Weathermore partly is organizing, and with a thoroughness far beyond anything our outfit attempted, if not dissuaded, they will get to the innermost nucleus of the Antarctic and melt and bore till they bring up that which may end the world, we know. So I must break through all... I don't know. That was me. That was me. That was Pinterest. Sorry. Even about the ultimate nameless thing beyond the mountains of madness. We get some water and we'll start chapter 4. I don't know how many chapters there are. But we have like 50 pages. 60 pages still to go. We have a lot. Actually, let me put that there. Better. Is that 12 chapters? What? 11. 10. Yeah, 12 chapters. Holy Bologna. That's a lot of chapters. You would think it would end here. Chapter 4. It is only with vast hesitancy and repugnance that I let my mind go back to Lake's camp and what we really found there, to that other thing beyond the frightful mountain wall. I am constantly tempted to the details and to let hints stand for actual facts and deductions. I hope I have said enough already to let me glide briefly over the rest that is of the horror at the camp. I have told of the wind-ravaged terrain, the damaged shelters, the disarranged machinery, the varied uneasiness of our dogs, the missing sledges and other items, the deaths of men and dogs, the absence of Gedney, and the 6 insanely buried biological specimen, strangely sound in texture for all of their structural injuries, from a world 40 million years dead. I do not recall whether I mentioned that upon checking up the canine bodies, we found one dog missing. We did not think much about that till later. Indeed, only Danforth and I thought of it at all. The principal things I have been keeping back relate to the bodies and to certain subtle points which may or may not lend a hideous and incredible kind of rationale to the apparent chaos. At the time I tried to keep the men's minds off those points, for it was so much simpler, so much more normal to lay everything to an outbreak of madness on the part of some of the Lake's party. From the look of things, that Demon Mountain wind must have been enough to drive any man mad in the midst of the center of all earthly mystery and desolation. The crowning abnormality, of course, was the condition of the bodies, men and dogs alike. They had all been in some terrible kind of conflict, and were torn and mangled in fiendish and altogether inexplicable ways. Death, so far as we could judge, had in each case come from strangulation or laceration. The dogs had evidently started the trouble, for the state of their ill-built corral bore witness to its forcible breakage from within. It's snow. The doggies like to eat snow. It had been set some distance from the camp because of the hatred of the animals for those hellish organisms, but the precaution seemed to have been taken in vain. When left alone in that monstrous wind behind flimsy walls of insufficient height, they must have stampeded, whether from the wind itself or from some subtle increasing odor emitted by the nightmare specimens, one could not say. Those specimens, of course, had been covered with a tent cloth, yet the low Antarctic sun had beat steadily upon that cloth, and Lake had mentioned that the solar heat tended to make the strangely sound and tough tissues of the things relax and expand. Perhaps the wind had whipped the cloth from over them and jostled them about in such a way that their more pungent qualities became manifest despite their unbelievable antiquity. But whatever had happened, it was hideous and revolting enough. Perhaps I'd better put squeamishness aside and tell the worst and last. That was a categorical statement of opinion, based on the first-hand observations and most rigid deductions of both Danforth and myself, that the then missing Gedney was in no way responsible for the loathsome horrors we found. I have said that the bodies were frightfully mangled. Now I must add that some were incised and subtracted from the most curious, cold-blooded, and inhumane fashion. It was the same with dogs and men. All the healthier, fatter bodies had their most solid masses of tissues cut out and removed as by a careful butcher, and around them was a strange sprinkling of salt, taken from the ravaged provision chest on the plains, which conjured up the most horrible associations. The thing had occurred in one of the crude airplane shelters from which the plane had been dragged out. The subsequent winds had affected all tracks which could have supplied any plausible theory. Scattered bits of clothing, roughly slashed from the human incision subjects, hinted no clues. It is useless to bring up the half impression of certain faint snow prints in one shielded corner of the ruined enclosure, because that impression did not concern human prints at all, but was clearly mixed up with all the talk of fossil prints, which poor Lake had been giving throughout the preceding weeks. One had to be careful of one's imagination and those overshadowing mountains of madness. They like to use the mountains of madness in this one. I like that. This one's really good. As I have indicated, Gedney and one dog turned out to be missing in the end. When we came on that terrible shelter, we had missed 2 dogs and 2 men, with a fairly unharmed dissecting tent, which we entered after investigating the monstrous graves, and had something to reveal. It was not as Lake had left it, for the covered parts of the primal monstrosity had been removed from the improvised table. Indeed, we had already realized that one of the 6 imperfect and insanely buried things we had found, the one with the trace of peculiarly hateful odor, must represent the collected sections of the entity, which Lake had tried to analyze. On and around their laboratory table were strewn over things, and it did not take long for us to guess that those things were the carefully, though oddly and inexpertly dissected parts of 1 man and 1 dog. I shall spare the feelings of survivors by omitting mention of the man's identity. Lake's anatomical instruments were missing, but there were evidences of their careful cleansing. The gasoline stove was also gone, though around it we found a curious litter of matches. We buried the human parts beside the other 10 men, and the canine parts with the other 35 dogs. My God, that many doggos? Concerning the bizarre smudges on the laboratory table and on the jumble of roughly handled illustrated books scattered near it, we were much too bewildered to speculate. This formed the worst of the camp horror. But other things were equally perplexing. The disappearance of Gedney, the other dog, the 8 uninjured biological specimens, the 3 sledges, and certain instruments, illustrated technical and scientific books, writing materials, electric torches and batteries, food and fuel, heating apparatus, spare tents, fursuits, and the like, was utterly beyond sane conjecture, as were likewise the fringed ink blots on certain pieces of paper and the evidences of curious alien fumbling and experimentation around the plains, and all other mechanical devices both at the camp and at the boring. The dogs seemed to abhor this oddly disordered machinery. Then, too, there was the upsetting of the disappearance of certain staples, and the jarringly comical heap of tin cans pried open in the most unlikely ways, at the most unlikely places. The provision of scattered matches, intact or broken or spent, formed another minor enigma, as did the 2 or 3 tent clothes and fursuits which we found lying about with peculiar and unorthodox slashings, conceivably due to clumsy efforts at unimaginable adaptations. The maltreatment of the human and canine bodies, and the crazy burial of the damaged specimens were all of a piece with this apparent madness. In view of just such an eventuality as the present one, we carefully photographed all of the main evidences of insane disorder at the camp, and shall use the prints to buttress our pleas against the departure of the proposed Starkweather Moor expedition. Our first act, after finding the bodies in the shelter, was to photograph and open the rows of insane graves with the 5-pointed snow mounds. We could not help noticing the resemblance of these monstrous mounds, with their clusters of grouped dots, to poor Lake's descriptions of the strange greenish soapstones. And when we came on some of the soapstones themselves in the great mineral pile, we found the likeness very close indeed. The whole general formation, it must be made, seemed abominably suggested of the starfish head of the entities, and we agreed that the suggestion must have worked potently upon the sensitized minds of Lake's overwrought party. Our own first sight of the actual buried entities formed a horrible moment, and sent the imaginations of Peabody and myself back to some of the shocking primal myths we had read and heard. We all agreed that mere sight and continued presence of the things must have cooperated with the oppressive polar solitude and demon mountain wind in driving Lake's party mad. For madness, centering in Gendy as the only possible surviving agent, was the explanation spontaneously adopted by everybody so far as spoken utterance was concerned, though I will not be so naive as to deny that each of us may have harbored wild guesses, while sanity forbade him to formulate completely. Sherman, Peabody, and McTeague made an exhaustive airplane cruise over all the surrounding territory in the afternoon, sweeping the horizon with field glasses in quest of Gendy and of various missing things, but nothing came to light. The party reported that the Titan barrier range extended endlessly to right and left alike without any diminishing in height or essential structure. On some of the peaks, though, the regular cube and rampart formations were bolder and plainer, having doubly fantastic similitudes to Warwick's painted ruins. The distribution of cryptical cave mouths on the snow-deluded summits seemed roughly even as far as the range could be traced. In spite of all the prevailing horrors, we were left with enough sheer scientific zeal and adventurousness to wonder about the unknown realm beyond these mysterious mountains. As far as our garden messages stated, we rested at midnight, after our day of terror and bafflement, but not without a tentative plan for one or more range-crossing altitude flights in a lightened plane with aerial camera and geologist outfit. Beginning the following morning, it was decided that Danforth and I tried it first, as we awakened at 7 a.m. intending on early trip, though heavy winds mentioned in our brief bulletin on the outside world delayed our start till nearly 9 o'clock. I have already repeated the non-committal story we told the men at camp and relayed outside after our return 16 hours later. It is now my terrible duty to amplify this account by filling in the merciful blanks with hints of what we really saw in the hidden world, hints of the revelations which have finally driven Danforth to a nervous collapse. I wish he would add a really frank word about the thing which he thinks he alone saw, even though it was probably a nervous delusion, and which was perhaps the last straw that put him where he is. But he is firm against that. All I can do is repeat his later disjointed whispers about what set him shrieking as the plane soared back through the wild, tortured mountain pass after that real and tangible shock, which I shared. This will form my last word. If the plain signs of surviving elder horrors and what I disclose be not enough to keep others from meddling with the inner Antarctic, or at least from prying too deeply beneath the surface of that ultimate waste of forbidden secrets and unhuman, cursed desolation, the responsibility for unnameable and perhaps immeasurable evils will not be mine. Danforth and I, studying the notes made by Peabody in his afternoon flight and checking up with the sextant, had calculated that the lowest available path in the range lay somewhat to the right of us, within sight of camp and about 23,000 or 24,000 feet above sea level. For this point, then, we first headed in the lightened plane as we embarked on our flight of discovery. The camp itself on foothills, which sprang from a high continental plateau, was some 12,000 feet in altitude. Hence, the actual height increase necessary was not so vast as it might seem. Nevertheless, we were acutely conscious of the rarefied air and intense cold as we rose. For on account of visibility conditions, we had to leave the cabin windows open. We were dressed, of course, in our heaviest furs. As we drew near the forbidding peaks, dark and sinister above the line of crevice-riven snow and glaciers, we noticed more and more the curiously regular formations clinging to the slopes, and the thought again of the strange paintings of Nicholas Roerich, I don't know how to say his name, the ancient wind-weathered rock, fully verified all of Lake's bulletins, and proved that these pinnacles had been towering up in exactly the same way since a surprisingly early time in Earth's history, perhaps over 50 million years. How much higher they had once been, it was futile to guess, but everything about this strange region pointed to obscure atmospheric influences unfavorable to change, and calculated to the usual climatic processes of rock disintegration. But it was a mountainside tangle of regular cubes and cave mouths which fascinated and disturbed us most. I studied them with a field glass, and took aerial photographs, whilst Danforth drove, and at times relieved him at the controls, though my aviation knowledge was purely an amateur's, in order to let him use the binoculars. We could easily see that much of the material of the things with a lightish quartz, unlike any formation visible over broad areas of the general surface, and that regularity was extreme and uncanny to an extent which poor Lake had scarcely hinted. As he had said, their edges were crumbled and rounded from untold eons of weathering, but their pre-natural solidity and tough material had saved them from obliteration. Many parts, especially those closest to the slopes, seemed identical in substance with the surrounding rock surface. The whole arrangement looked like the ruins of Machu Picchu in the Andes, or the foundation walls of Kish, as dug up by the Oxford Field Museum expedition in 1929. And both Danforth and I obtained an occasional impression of separate cyclopean blocks, which Lake had attributed to his flight companion Carol. How to account for such things in this place was frankly beyond me. I felt oddly humbled as a geologist. Formations often have strange regularities, like the famous Giant's Causeway in Ireland, but the stupendous range, despite Lake's original suspicion of smoking cones, was above all else non-volcanic in evident structure. The curious cave mouths, near which the odd formation seemed most abundant, presented another albeit a lesser puzzle, because of the regularity of outline. They were, as Lake's bulletins had said, often approximately square or semicircular, as if the nature orifices had been shaped to greater symmetry by some magic hand. Their numerous and wide distribution were remarkable, and suggested that the whole region was honeycombed with tunnels dissolved out of limestone. Such glimpses as we secured did not extend far within the caverns, but we saw that they were apparently clear of stalagmites and the other one. Stalactites? Whatever. Outside we saw that they were apparently clear of outside those parts of the mountain slopes adjoining the apertures seemed invariably smooth and regular, and Danforth thought that the slight cracks and pittings of the weathering tended toward unusual patterns. Filled as he was with the horrors and strangeness discovered at the camp, he hinted that the pittings vaguely resembled those baffling groups of dots sprinkled over the primeval greenish soapstone so hideously duplicated on the madly conceived snow mounds above those 6 buried monstrosities. Just a second. I'm gonna lean back for a second. We had risen gradually and flying over the higher foothills and along toward the relatively low pass we had selected. As we advanced, we occasionally looked down at the snow and ice at the land route, wondered whether we could have attempted the trip with the simpler equipment of earlier days. Somewhat to our surprise, we saw that the terrain was far from difficult as such things go, and that despite the crevices and the other bad spots, it would not have been likely to deter the sledges of Scott, Shackleman, or Amsterdam. Some of the glaciers appeared to lead up to the wind-barren passes with unusual continuity, and upon reaching our chosen path, we found that its case formed no exception. Our sensations of tense expectancy as we prepared to round the crest and peer out over an untrodden world had hardly be described on paper, even though we had no cause to think the regions beyond the range essentially different from those already seen and traversed. The touch of evil mystery in these barrier mountains, and in the beckoning sea of the opalescent sky glimpsed betwixt their summits, was a highly subtle and matter not to be explained in literal words. Rather, was it an affair of vague psychological symbolism and aesthetic association, a thing mixed up with exotic poetry and paintings, and with archaic myths lurking in shunned and forbidden volumes. Even the wind's burden held a peculiar strain of conscious malignity? Got it. And for a second it seemed that the composite sound included a bizarre musical whistling or piping over a wide range as the blast swept in and out of the omnipresent and resonant cave mouths. There was a cloudy note of reminiscent repulsion in the sound, as complex and unplaceable as any of the other dark impressions. We were now, after low ascent, at a height of 23,000 feet. 23,570 feet, according to the... I don't know how to say. And had left the region of clinging snow definitely below us. Up here were only bare rock slopes at the dark of rough-ribbed glaciers, but with those provocative cues and echoing caves mount to add a potent of the unnatural, the fantastic, and the dreamlike. Looking along the line of high peaks, I thought I could see the one mentioned by Poor Lake, with a rampart exactly on top. It seemed to be half lost in an odd Antarctic haze, such a haze perhaps as had been responsible for Lake's early notion of volcanicism. The pass loomed directly before us, smooth and windswept, beyond its jagged and malignity frowning pylons. Beyond it was a sky fretted with swirling vapors and lighted by the low polar sun, the sky of the mysterious farther realm upon which he felt no human eye had ever gazed. A few more feet of altitude, and we would behold that realm. Danforth and I, unable to speak, except in shouts, amidst the howling, piping wind that raced through the pace, and added to the noise of the unmuffled engines, exchanged eloquent glances, and then, having gained those last few feet, we did indeed stare across a momentous divide and over the unsampled secrets of an elder and utterly alien Earth. That ends chapter 4. We'll start chapter 5 and we'll get some more. Ugh. We have like 52 pages. No. Yeah, about 52 pages left to go. And we've read 45 pages. Yeah, we've read 45 pages. Oof. It's gonna take us about another 2.5 hours. We'll get there, though. We'll get there. Chapter 5. I think that both of us simultaneously cried out in mixed awe, wonder, terror, and disbelief in our own senses as we finally cleared the pass, and saw what lay beyond. Of course, we must have had some natural theory in the back of our heads to steady our faculties for the moment. Probably thought of such things as the grotesquely weathered stones of the Garden of the Gods in Colorado, or the fantastically symmetrical wind-carved rocks of the Arizona desert. Perhaps we even half thought the sight of a mirage like that we had seen the morning before on first approaching those mountains of madness. We must have had some such normal notions to fall back upon as our eyes swept their limitless, tempest sacred plateau, and grasped an almost endless labyrinth of colossal, regular, and geometrical stone masses, which reared their crumpled and pitted crest above a glacial sheet not more than 40 or 50 feet high, 40 or 50 feet deep at its thickest, and in places obviously thinner. The effect of the monstrous sight was indescribable, for some fiendish violation of no natural law seemed certain at the outset. Here in a hellaciously ancient tableland fully 20,000 feet high, in a climate deadly to habitation, since... Yeah.
What are we having for dinner?
I don't know, I'm streaming.
I want you to put it down.
Okay. Since a pre-human age not less than 500,000 years ago, there stretched nearly to the vision's limit a tangle of orderly stone which only the desperation of mental self-defense could possibly attribute to any but a conscious and artificial cause. We had previously dismissed, so far as serious thought was concerned, any theory that the cubes of the mountainsides were other than natural in origin. How could they be otherwise, when man himself could scarcely have been differentiated from the great... Hold on. Could they be otherwise when man himself could scarcely have been differentiated from the apes at the time when this region succumbed to the present unbroken reign of glacier death? Yet now the sway of reason seemed irrefutably shaken, for the cyclopean maze of squared, curved, and angled blocks had features which cut off all comfortable refuge. It was very clearly the blasphemous city of the mirage and stark objective and in reality. That damnable portent had had a material basis. After all, there had been some horizontal stratum of ice dust in the upper air, and the shocking stone survival had projected its image across the mountains according to the simple laws of reflection. Of course, the phantom had been twisted and exaggerated, and contained things which the real source did not contain. Yet now, as we saw the real source, we thought it even more hideous and menacing than its distant image. Only the incredible, unhuman massiveness of these vast stone towers and had saved the frightful thing from utter annihilation in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years it had brooded there amidst the blasts of a bleak upland. Roof of the world. All sorts of fantastic phrases sprang to our lips as we looked dizzily down at the unbelievable spectacle. I thought again of the Eldritch? Primal myths that had so persistently haunted me since my first sight of the dead Antarctic world, of the demonic plateau, or this abominable snowman of the Himalayas, of the manuscripts with their pre-human implications, of the Cthulhu cult of the Necronomicon, and of the legends of formless, I don't know how to say 90% of these words, guys, and the worse than formless star spawn associated with this semi-entity. For boundless miles in every direction, the thing stretched out with very little sitting. Indeed, as our eyes followed it for the right and left along the base of the low, gradual foothills which separated it from the actual mountain rim, we decided that we could see no thinning at all except for the interruption at the left of the path through which we had come. We had merely struck, at random, a limited part of something of incalculable extent. The foothills were more sparsely sprinkled with grotesque stone structures, linking the terrible city to the already familiar cubes which evidently formed its mountain outposts. These latter, as well as the odd cave mouths, were as thick on the inner as on the outer sides of the mountains. The nameless stone labyrinth consisted for the most part of walls from 10 to 150 feet in ice, clear height, and of thickness varying from 5 to 10 feet. It was composed mostly of blocks of primordial slate and sandstone, blocks in many cases as large as 4 by 6 by 8 feet. Those are some pretty big ass blocks. Though in several places it seemed to be carved out of solid, uneven bedrock. The buildings were far from equal in size. There being innumerable honeycomb arrangements in enormous extent, as well as smaller separate structures. The general shape of these things tended to be like conical pyramids or terraced, though there were many perfect cylinders, perfect cubes, clusters of cubes, and other rectangular forms and a peculiar sprinkling of angles, whose five-pointed ground plan roughly suggested modern fortifications. The builders had made constant expert use of the principle of the arc, and domes had probably existed in the city's heyday. The whole tangle was monstrously weathered, and the glacial surface from which the towers projected was strewn with fallen blocks and debris. When the glacier was transparent, we could see the lower parts of the gigantic piles and noticed the ice-preserved stone bridges, which connected the different towers at varying distances above the ground. On the exposed walls, we could detect the scarred places where other and higher bridges of the same sort had existed. Closer inspection revealed countless largest windows, some of which were closed with shutters of a petrified material, originally wood, though most gaped open in a sinister and menacing fashion. Many of the ruins, of course, were roofless and with uneven. I literally lost where I was. That sucks. Oh, hell. Many of the ruins, of course, were roofless, and with uneven through the wind-rounded upper edges, whilst others of a more sharply cone or pyramidal model, or else protected by higher surrounding structures, preserved intact outlines despite the omnipresent crumbling and pitting. With the field glass, we could barely make out what seemed to be sculptural decorations in horizontal bands, decorations including those curious grounds of dots, whose presence on the ancient soapstones now assumed a vastly larger significance. In many places, the buildings were totally ruined and the ice sheet deeply riven from various geological causes. In other places, the stonework was worn down to the very level of the glacier. Okay. One broad swath extending from the plateau's interior to a cleft in the foothills, above a mile to the left of the pass we had traversed, was wholly free from buildings and probably represented, we concluded, the course of some great river. Cool. 50 pages to go. The great river, which in times millions of years ago had poured through the city and into some subterranean abyss of the Great Barrier Range. Certainly this was above all a region of caves, gulfs, and underground, secrets beyond humans' penetration. Looking back to our sensations and recalling our dazedness at viewing this monstrous survival from eons we had thought pre-human, I can only wonder that we preserved the equilibrium which we did. Of course, we knew that something, chronologically, scientific theory, or our own consciousness, was woefully awry. Yet we kept enough poise to guide the plane, observed many things quite minutely, and take a careful series of photographs, which may yet serve both us and the world in a good stead. In my case, ingrained scientific habit may have helped, for above all the bewilderment and sense of menace, these burns a dominant curiosity to fathom more of this age-old secret, to know what sort of beings had built and lived in the incalculably gigantic place, and what relation to the general world of its time, or of other times, so unique a concentration of life could have had. Hold on just a second, I'm going to turn a little bit. Okay. For this place could be no ordinary city. It must have formed the primary nucleus and center of some archaic and unbelievable chapter of Earth's history, whose outward ramifications recalled only dimly in the most obscure and distorted myths, and vanished utterly in mystic chaos of convulsions long before any human race we know had shambled out of a no, it's not a pendium. Of the world. I'm gonna go with that. Here sprawled a megalopolis, compared with which the fabled Atlantis and other cities in the land of Lamar are recent things of today, not even of yesterday. A megalopolis ranking with such whispered pre-human blasphemies as Rely. We've seen that one. In the nameless city of the desert, and we flew above the tangle of stark Titan towers. My imagination sometimes escaped all bounds and roved aimlessly in the realms of fantastic associations, even weaving links betwixt this lost world and some of my own wildest dreams concerning the mad horror at the camp. The plane's fuel tank in the interest of greater lightness had been only partly filled, hence we now had to exert caution in our explorations. Even so, however, we covered an enormous extent of ground, or rather air, after swooping down to a level where the wind became virtually nothing. There seemed to be no limit to the mountain range, or to the length of the frightful stone city, which bordered its inner foothills. 50 miles of flight in each direction showed no major change in the labyrinth of rock and masonry that clawed up course light through the internal ice. There were, though, some highly absorbing diversifications, such as the carvings on the canyon where that broad river had once pierced the foothills and approached its sinking place in the great range. The headlands at the stream's entrance had been boldly carved into the cyclopean pylons, and something about the ridgy, barrel-shaped design stirred up oddly vague, hateful, and confusing semi-remembrances in both Danforth and I. We also came upon several star-shaped open spaces, evidently public squares, and noted various deletions in the terrain. Where a sharp hill rose, it was generally hollowed out into some sort of rambling stone, but there was at least two exceptions. Of these latter, one was too badly weathered to disclose what had been on the while the other still bore a fantastic cone-like monument carved out of the solid rock and roughly resembling such things as the well-known snake tomb in the ancient valley of Petra. Flying inland from the mountains, we discovered that the city was not of infinite width, even though its length along the foothills seemed endless. After about 30 miles, the grotesque stone buildings began to thin out, and in 10 more miles we came to an unbroken waste of virtually without signs of sentient artifice. The course of the river beyond the city seemed marked by a broad depressed line, while the land assumed a somewhat greater ruggedness, seeming to slope slightly upward as it receded into the mist-hazed west. So far we had made no landing, yet to leave the plateau without an attempt at entering some of the monstrous structures would have been inconceivable. Accordingly, we decided to find a smooth place on the foothills near our where they can navigate past. I'm sorry, I can't read. And they're grounding the plane and preparing to do some exploration on foot. Though these gradual slopes were partly covered with a scattering of ruins, low flying soon disclosed an ample number of possible landing places, selecting that nearest to the path, since our next flight would be across the Great Range and back to camp. We succeeded about 12:30 p.m. in coming down on a smooth, hard snowfield wholly devoid of obstacles, and well adapted to a swift and favorable takeoff later on. It did not seem necessary to protect the plane with a snowbanking for so brief a time, and in so comfortable an absence of high winds at this level, hence we merely saw that the landing skis were safely lodged, and that the vital parts of the mechanism were guarded against the cold. For our foot journey, we discarded the heaviest of our flying furs, and took with us a small amount consisting of pocket compass, hand camera, light provisions, voluminous notebooks, and paper. Geologist's hammer and chisel, specimen bags, coiled climbing rope, and powerful electric torches with extra batteries. This equipment had been carried in the plane on the chance that we might be able to effect a landing. Taking ground pictures, making drawings and topograph sketches, and obtain a rock specimen from some bare slope, outcropping, or mountain cave. Fortunately, we had a supply of extra paper to tear up, place in a spare specimen bag, and use on the ancient principle of hare and hounds for marking our course in any interior mazes we might be able to penetrate. This had been brought in case we found some cave systems with air quiet enough to allow such a rapid and easy method in place of the usual rock chipping method of trail blazing. Walking cautiously downhill over the crusted snow toward the stupendous stone labyrinth that loomed against the opalescent west, we felt almost as keen a sense of imminent marvels as we had felt on the approaching the unfathomed mountain pass 4 hours previously. True, we had become visually familiar with the incredible secret concealed by the barrier peaks, yet the prospect of actually entering the primordial walls reared by conscious beings perhaps millions of years ago, before any known race of men could have existed, was nonetheless awesome and potentially terrible in its implications of cosmic abnormality. Though the thinness of the air at the prodigious altitude made exertion somewhat more difficult than usual, both Danforth and I found ourselves bearing up very well, and felt equal to almost any task which might fall to our lot. It took only a few steps to bring us into a shapeless ruin, worn level with the snow, while 10 or 15 rods farther on there was a huge roofless rampart still complete in its gigantic five-pointed outline, and rising to an irregular height of 10 or 11 feet. For this ladder we headed, and when at last we were actually able to touch its weathered cyclopean blocks, we felt that we established an unprecedented and almost blasphemous link with forgotten eons, normally closed to our species. Hold on just a second. My eyes are like literally killing me. Okay. My God, we have still so much to go. This part, shaped like a star and perhaps 300 feet from point to point, was built of Jurassic sandstone blocks of irregular size, averaging 6 by 8 feet in surface. There was a row of arched loopholes, or windows, about 4 feet wide and 5 feet high, spaced quite symmetrically along the points of the star and its inner angles, with the bottoms about 4 feet from the surface. Looking through these, we could see that the masonry was fully 5 feet thick, that there was no partitions remaining within, and that there were traces of banded carvings or reliefs on the interior walls. Facts we had indeed guessed before when flying low over the part others like it. Though lower parts must have originally existed, all traces of such things were now wholly obscured by the deep layer of ice and snow at this point. We crawled through one of the windows and vainly tried to decipher the nearly effaced mural designs, but did not attempt to disturb the floor. Our orientation flights had indicated that many buildings in the city proper were less ice-choked, and that we might perhaps find wholly clear interiors leading down to the true ground level if we entered those structures still roofed at the top. Before we left the part, we photographed it carefully and studied its mortarless cyclopean masonry with complete bewilderment. We wish that Peabody were present, for his engineering knowledge might have helped us guess how such titanic blocks could have been handled in that unbelievably remote age when the city and its outskirts were built up. The half-mile walk downhill to the actual city were with the upper wind shrieking vainly and savagely through the skyward peaks in the background, with something whose smallest details will always remain engraved on my mind. Only in fantastic nightmares could any human beings but Danforth and me conceive such optical effects. Between us, the churning vapors of the west lay that monstrous tangle of dark stone towers, its outer and incredible forms impressing us afresh at every new angle of vision, is a mirage in solid stone. And were it not for the photographs, I would still not doubt that such a thing could be. The general type of masonry was identical with that of the part we had examined, but the extravagant shapes which the masonry took in its urban manifestations were past all description. Even the pictures illustrate only one or two phases of its infinite, bizarre, endless variety, preternatural massiveness, and utterly alien life. There were geometrical forms for which an could scarcely find a name, cones of all degrees of irregularity, and terraces of every sort of provocative disproportion, shafts with odd bulbous enlargements, broken columns and curious groups, and five-pointed or five-ridged arrangements of mad grotesqueness. As we drew nearer, we could see beneath certain transparent parts of the ice sheet and detect some of the tubular stone bridges that connected the crazily sprinkled structures at various heights. Of orderly sheets there seemed to be none, the only broad open swath being a mile to the left, where the ancient river had doubtless flowed through the town into the mountains. Our field glasses showed the external horizon, bands of nearly defaced sculptures and dots grouped to be very prevalent, and we could half imagine what the city must have looked like, even though most of the roofs and tower tops had necessarily perished. As a whole, it had been a complex tangle of twisted lanes and alleys, all of them deep canyons, and some little better than tunnels because of the overhanging masonry or overarching bridges. Now outspread below us, it looms like a dream fantasy against the westward mist, though whose northern and the low reddish Antarctic sun of early afternoon was struggling to shine, and when for a moment the sun encountered a denser obstruction and plunged the scene into temporary shadow, the effect was subtly menacing in a way I can never hope to depict. Even the faint howling and piping of the unfelt wind in the great mountain passes behind us took on a wilder note of oh my god. Purple. Why do I keep saying purple? Purposeful malignity. My god, brain, please work. The last stage of our descent to this town was unusually steep and abrupt, and a rock outcropping at the edge where the grade change led us to think that the artificial torrents had once existed there. Under the glacier, we believed that there would be a flight of step or its equivalent. When at last we plunged into the labyrinth town itself, clambering over fallen masonry and shrinking from the oppressive nearness and dwarfing height of omnipresent crumbling and pitted walls, our sensations again became such that I marvel at the amount of self-control we retained. Danforth was frankly jumping and began making some offensively irrelevant speculations about the horror at the camp, which I resented all the more because I could not help sharing certain conclusions forced upon us by many features of this morbid survival from nightmare antiquity. The speculations worked on his imagination too, for in one place, where a debris-littered alley turned a sharp corner, he insisted that he saw faint traces of ground markings which he did not like, while elsewhere he stopped to listen to the subtle imaginary sounds from some undefined point, a muffled musical piping, he said, not unlike that of a wind in the mountain caves, yet somehow disturbingly different. The ceaseless five-pointedness of the surrounding architecture and of the few distinguishable mural had a dimly sinister suggestiveness we could not escape, and gave us a touch of terrible subconscious, certainly concerning the primal entities which had reared and dwelt in this unhallowed place. I mean, did he say? I'm trying to think if Lake said. I don't think Lake had said. No, he did say. I was wondering if Danforth was saying, yeah, I can hear music, but, and it'd be totally, a coincidence that he hears it, and that, yeah, it's definitely like a mini Cthulhu. Nevertheless, our scientific adventurous souls were not wholly dead, and we mechanically carried out our program of chipping specimens from all the different rock types represented in the masonry. We wished a rather full set in order to draw better conclusions regarding the age of the place. Nothing in the greater outer walls seemed to date from later than the Jurassic period, nor was any piece of stone in the entire place of a greater recency than, I don't know, a particular age. In stark certainty, we were wandering amidst a death which had resigned at least 500,000 years, in all probability even longer. As we proceeded through the maze of stone-shadowed twilight, we stopped at all available parts to study interiors and investigate entrance possibilities. Some were above our reach, while others led only into ice-choked ruins, as unroofed and barren as the rampart on the hill. One, though spacious and inviting, opened on a seemingly bottomless abyss, without visible means of descent. Now and then we had a chance to study the petrified wood of a surviving shutter, and were impressed by the fabulous antiquity implied in the still discernible grain. These things had come from the Mesozoic. Oh my god, I can't. And especially Cretaceous, and from the fan palms and early, plainly nothing definitely later than the, oh my god, could be discovered in the placing of these shutters, whose edges showed the former presence of odd and long vanished hinges. Usage seemed to be varied, some being on the outer and some in place, thus surviving the rusting of their former and probably metallic fixtures and fastenings. After a time, we came across a row of windows, in the bulges of colossal five-ridged cone of undamaged apex, which led into a vast, well-preserved room with stone flooring, but these were too high in the room to permit of descent without a rope. We had a rope with us, but did not wish to bother with this 20-foot drop unless obliged to, especially in this thin plateau air, where great demands were made upon the heart action. This enormous room was probably a hall or concourse of some sort, and our electric torches showed bold, distinct, and potentially startling sculptures arranged around the walls in broad horizontal bands separated by equally broad strips of conventional structures. We took carefully note of this spot, planning to enter here unless a more easily gained interior were encountered. Finally, though, we did encounter exactly the opening we wished, an archway about 6 feet wide and 10 feet high, making the formal end of aerial bridge, which had spanned the alley about 5 feet high above the present level of the glacier. Those archways, of course, were flush with upper story floors, and in the case one of the floors still existed. The building thus accessible with a series of rectangular terraces on our left facing westward. That across the alley where the other archway yawned was a decrepit cylinder with no windows and with a curious bulge about 10 feet above the part. It was totally dark inside, and the archway seemed to open on a well of emptiness. Heaped debris made the entrance to the vast left-hand building doubly easy. Yet for a moment we hesitated before taking advantage of the long-wished chance, for though we had penetrated into this tangle of archaic mystery, it required fresh resolution to carry us actually inside a complete and surviving building of a fabulous elder world, whose nature was becoming more and more hideously plain to us. In the end, however, we made the plunge and scrambled up over the rubble into the gaping hole. The floor beyond was of great slate slabs, and seemed to form the outlet of a long, high corridor with sculptured walls. Observing the many inner archways which led off from it, and realizing the probable complexity of the nest of apartments within, we decided that we must begin our system of hare-and-hound trailblazing, hitherto, I don't know. Following our compasses together, with frequent glimpses of the vast mountain range between the towers and our rear, had been enough to prevent our losing our way. But from now on, the artificial... Oh my god, we're not gonna get through this today. I might just call it here. I might call it after this chapter, because we'll be at chapter 6, and there's still 6 more chapters. And we've already been reading for 3 hours. This is going to take another 2 hours from here, and I don't have that in me today. And prepared to use them as economically as safety would allow. This method would probably gain us immunity from straying, since there did not appear to be any strong air currents inside the primordial masonry. If such should develop, or if our paper supply should give out, we could of course fall back on the more secure, though more tedious, method of rock chipping. Just how extensive a territory we had opened up, it was impossible to guess without a trial. The close and frequent connection of the different buildings made it likely that we might cross from one to another on bridges underneath the ice, except where impeded by local collapses and geologic rifts, for very little like glacier seemed to have entered the massive constructions. Almost all the areas of the transparent ice had revealed the submerged windows as tightly shuttered as if the town had been left in a uniform state until the glacier sheet came to crystallize the lower part of all succeeding time. Indeed, one gained a curious impression that this place had been deliberately closed and deserted in some dim bygone era, rather than overwhelmed by any sudden calamity or even gradual decay. Had the coming of the ice been foreseen? Had a nameless population left en masse to seek a less doomed abode? The precise physiographic conditions. I can say that word? Really? Okay, whatever. Attending the formations of the ice sheet at this point would have to wait for later solutions. It had not, very plainly, been a grinding drive. Perhaps the pressure of accumulated snows had been responsible, and perhaps some flood from the river or from the bursting of some ancient glacier dam in the Great Range had helped to create the special state now observable. Imagination can conceive almost anything in connection with this place. And that ends chapter 5. And I don't know. I should probably do one more chapter, and then we'll be, because we'll be 6, and that'll be halfway to God. I don't know if I can do another chapter. I can do another chapter. It's not long. Then we'll have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, so we'll do one more chapter, and then I'll call it. I want to get at least halfway through, because I don't think I can finish it all today, to be honest. Because I am feeding fast today. So, chapter 6. It would be cumbersome to give a detailed consecutive amount of wanderings inside that cavernous, dead honeycomb of primal masonry, that monstrous layer of elder secrets which now echoed for the first time after uncounted years to the tread of human feet. Is especially true because so much of the horrible drama and revelation came from a mere study of the omnipresent carvings. Our flashlight photographs of those carvings will do much toward proving the truth of what we were now disclosing. And it is that we had not a larger film supply. It was lame that we didn't have a larger film supply with us. Okay, that's where lame came from. As it was, we made crude notebook sketches of certain features after all our films were used up. The building which we had entered was one of great size and elaborateness, and gave us an impressive notion of the architecture of that nameless geologic past. The inner partitions were less massive than the outer walls, but on the lower levels were excellently preserved. Labyrinth complexity, involving curiosity, irregular differences in floor levels, characterized the entire arrangement, and we could certainly have been lost at the very outset, but for the trail of torn paper left behind us, we decided to explore the more decrepit upper parts, were of all hence climbed aloft in the maze for a distance of some 100 feet to where the topmost tier of chambers yawned snowily and ruinously open to the polar sky. Ascent was effected over the steep transversely ribbed stone ramps or inclined planes which everywhere served in lieu of the stairs. The rooms we encountered were of all imaginable shapes and proportions, ranging from 5-pointed stars to triangles and perfect cubes. It must be safe to say that their general average was about 30 by 30 feet in floor area and 20 feet in height. Though many larger apartments existed. After thoroughly examining the upper regions and the glacier level, we descended story by story into the submerged part, where indeed we soon saw we were in a continuous maze of connected chambers and passages, probably leading over unlimited areas outside the particular building. The cyclopean massiveness and giganticism of everything about us became curiously oppressive, and there was something vaguely but deeply unhuman in all of the contours, dimensions, proportions, decorations, and constructural nuances of the blasphemously archaic stonework. We soon realized from what the carvings revealed that this monstrous city was many million years old. We cannot yet explain the engineering principles used in the balancing and adjustment of the vast rock masses, though the function of the arch was clearly much relied on. The rooms we visited were wholly bare of all portable contents, a circumstance which sustained our belief in the city's deliberate desertion. The prime decorative feature was the almost universal system of mural sculpture, which tended to run on continuous horizontal bands, 3 feet wide and arranged from floor to ceiling in alternation with bands of equal width given over to geometrical shapes. There were exceptions to this rule of arrangement, but it was overwhelming. Often, however, a series of smooth stone, containing oddly patterned groups of dots would be sunk along one of the bands. The technique we soon saw was mature, accomplished, aesthetically evolved in the highest degree of civilized mastery, though utterly alien in every detail to any known art tradition of the human race. In delicacy of execution to no sculpture I have ever seen could approach it. I think it's minutest. I'm garbage at pronouncing shit. Details of elaborate vegetation or of animal life were rendered with astonishing vividness despite the bold scale of the carvings, whilst the conventional designs were marvels of skillful intricacy. What was displayed a profound use of mathematical principles and were made up of obscurely symmetrical curves and angles based on the quantity of 5. The pictorial bands followed a highly formalized tradition and involved a peculiar treatment of perspective, but had an artistic force that moved us profoundly, notwithstanding the intervening gulf of vast geologic periods. The method of design hinged on a singular, I want to say juxtaposition. Oh my god, brain! Of the cross-section with the two-dimensional silhouette, and embodied an analytical psychologically beyond that any known race of antiquity. It is useless to try to compare this art with any represented in our museums. Those who see our photographs will probably find its closest analog in certain grotesque conceptions of the most daring futurists. The tracery consisted altogether of depressed lines whose depth on unweathered walls varied from 1 to 2 inches. When with the dot groups appeared evidently as inscriptions in some unknown and primordial language and alphabet. The depression of the smooth surface with perhaps 1.5 inches, and of dots perhaps a 1/2 inch more. The pictorial bands were in counter-sunk low relief, their background being depressed about 2 inches from the original wall surface. In some specimens, marks of a former could be detected, though for the most part the untold eons had disintegrated and banished any pigments which may have been applied. The more one studied the marvelous technique, the more one admired the things. Beneath their strict conventionalization, one could grasp the minute and accurate observation and graphic skill of the artist, and indeed the very conventions themselves serve to symbolize and accentuate the real essence of or vital differentiation of every object. We felt too that besides these recognizable excellences, there were others lurking beyond the reach of our perceptions. Certain touches here and there gave vague hints of symbols and stimuli which another mental and emotional background and a fuller or different sensory equipment might have made of profound and poignant significant to us. The subject matter of the sculptures obviously came from the life of the vanished creatures of their creation. I don't know. And contain a large proportion of evident history. It is this abnormal historic mindedness of the primal race, a chance circumstance operating through coincidence, miraculously in our favor, which made the carving so awesomely informative to us, and which caused us to place, oh my god, their photography and transcription above all other considerations. In certain rooms, the dominant arrangement was varied by the presence of maps, uh, astronomical charts, and other scientific designs on an enlarged scale, these things giving a naive and terrible corroboration to what we gathered from pictorial and hinting at what the whole revealed. I can only hope that my account will not arouse a curiosity greater than sane caution on the part of those who believe me at all. It would be tragic if any were to be allured to the realm of death and horror by the very warning meaning to discourage them. Interrupting these sculptured walls were high windows and massive 12-foot doorways, both now and then retaining the petrified wooden planks, elaborately carved and polished, of the actual shutters and doors. All metal fixtures had long ago vanished, but some of the doors remained in place and had to be forced aside as we progressed from room to room. Window frames with odd transparent panes, mostly elliptical, survived here and there, though in no considerable quantity. There were also frequent niches of great magnitude, generally empty, but once in a while containing some bizarre object carved from green soapstone, which was either broken or perhaps held too inferior to warrant removal. Other parts were undoubtedly connected with mechanical facilities, heating, lighting, and the like, of a sort suggested in many of the carving. Ceilings tended to be plain, but had sometimes been inlaid with green soapstone or other tiles, mostly fallen now. Floors were also paved with such tiles, though plain stonework predominated. As I have said, all furniture and other movables were absent, but the sculptures gave a clear idea of the strange devices which had once filled these tomb-like echoing rooms. Above the glacier sheet, the floors were generally thick with litter and debris, but farther down this condition decreased. In some of the lower chambers and corridors there was little more than gritty dust or ancient incrustations, while occasional areas had an uncanny air of newly swept immaculateness. I can say that word. Of course, where rifts or collapses had occurred, the lower levels were as littered as the upper ones. The central court, as in other structures we had seen from the air, saved the inner regions from total darkness, so that we seldom had to use our electric torches in the upper rooms except when studying sculptured details. Below the ice cap, however, the twilight deepened, and in many parts of the tangled ground level there was an approach to absolute darkness. Yeah, almost done. To form even a rudimentary idea of our thoughts and feelings as we penetrated this eon-silent maze of unhuman masonry, one must correlate a hopelessly bewildering chaos of fugitive moods, memories, and impressions. The sheer appalling antiquity and lethal desolation of the place were enough to overwhelm almost any sensitive person, but added to these elements were the recent unexplained horror at the camp, and the revelations all too soon effected by the terrible mural sculptures around us. The moment we came upon a perfect section of carving where no ambiguity or of interpretation could exist, it took only a brief study to give us the hideous truth, a truth which it would be naive to claim Danforth and I had not independently suspected before, though we had carefully refrained from even hinting it to each other. There could not be no further merciful doubtful about the nature of the beings which had built and inhabited this monstrous dead city millions of years ago, when man's ancestors were primitive mammals, and vast dinosaurs roamed the tropical. When the dinosaurs roamed the tropics, we'll go with that. We had previously clung to a desperate alternative, and insisted each to himself that the omnipresence of the five-pointed motif meant only some cultural or religious exaltation of the natural object, which had to so patiently or patently embody the quality of five-pointedness. As the decorative motifs and exalted the sacred bull, those of Egypt, the scarab, those of Rome, the wolf and the eagle, and those of various savage. And in the various tribes, some chosen totem animal. But this lone refuge was now stripped from us, and we were forced to face, definitely, defiantly, the reason-shaking realization which the reader of these pages has doubtless long ago anticipated. I can scarcely bear to write it down in black and white even now, but perhaps that will not be necessarily. The things once rearing and dwelling in this frightful masonry in the age of dinosaurs were not indeed dinosaurs, but far worse. Mere dinosaurs were new and almost brainless objects, but the builders of the city were wise and old, and had left certain traces in rocks even then laid down well nigh 1,000 million years. Rocks laid down before the true life of Earth had advanced beyond plastic groups of cells. Rocks laid down before the true life of Earth had existed at all. They were the makers of that life, and above all doubt, the originals of the fiendish elder myths, which things like the manuscripts and the Necronomicon frighteningly hint about. They were the great old ones that had filtered down the stars when Earth was young. The beings whose substance an alien evolution had shaped, and whose powers were such as the planet had never bred. And to think that only the day before Danforth and I had actually looked upon fragments of their millennially fossilized substance, and that poor Lake and his party had seen their complete outlines. It is, of course, impossible for me to relate in proper order the stages by which we picked up what we know of the monstrous chapter of pre-human life. After the first shock of the certain revelation, we had to pause a while to recuperate, as it was fully 3 o'clock before we got started on our actual tour of systematic research. The sculptures in the building we entered were of relatively late date, perhaps 2 million years ago, as checked up by geological, biological, and astronomical features, and embodied an art which would be called decadent in comparison with that of specimens we found in older buildings after crossing bridges under the glacier sheet. One evidence shown from the solid rock seemed to go back 40 or possibly even 50 million years to the lower or upper Cretaceous, and contain release of an artistry surpassing anything else, with one tremendous exception that we encountered. That was, we have since agreed, the oldest domestic structure we traversed. Were it not for the support of those flashlights soon to be made public, I would refrain from telling what I found and inferred, lest I be confined as a madman. Of course, the infinitely early parts of the patchwork tale, representing the pre-terrestrial life of the star-headed beings on other planets and in other galaxies and other universes, can readily be interpreted as a fantastic mythology of those beings themselves. Yet such parts sometimes involved designs and diagrams so uncannily close to the latest findings of mathematics and astrophysics that I scarcely know what to think. Let others judge when they see the photographs I shall publish. Naturally, no one set of carvings which we encountered told more than a fraction of any connected story, nor did we even begin to come upon the various stages of that story in their proper order. Some of the vast rooms were independent units so far as their designs were concerned, whilst in other cases a continuous chronicle would be carried through a series of rooms and corridors. The best of the maps and diagrams were on the walls of a frightful abyss below, even the ancient ground level, a cavern perhaps 200 feet square and 60 feet high, which had almost undoubtedly been an educational center of some sort. There was many provoking repetitions of the same material in different rooms and buildings, since certain chapters of experience with certain summaries or phases of history had evidently been favorites with different decorators or dwellers. Sometimes, though, variant versions of the same theme proved useful in settling debatable points and filling in gaps. I still wonder what we deduced so much in the short time at our disposal. Of course, we even now have only the barest outline. and much of that was obtained later on from a study of the photographs and sketches we made. It may be the effect of this later study, the revived memories, the vague impressions acting in conjunction with general sensitiveness, and with the final supposed horror glimpse, whose essence he will not reveal even to me, which has been the immediate source of Danforth's present breakdown, but had to be, for we could not issue our warning intelligently without the fullest possible information, and the issuance of that warning is a prime necessity. Certain lingering influences in that unknown Antarctic world of disordered time and alien natural law make it imperative that further exploration be discouraged. And that, chat, is where we're going to end stream today. Yeah, I can't make it. We got to chapter 7, so we read 6 chapters, so we're halfway through the story. Like, there's like 35 more pages. I can't make it today. Not today. We'll try it. We'll do a read again next month. I do have the book saved. We're on chapter 7. It's not that bad. But yeah, I appreciate you guys hanging out. I'm getting tired. I'm not in as bad of a mood as I was earlier, so I really appreciate you guys hanging out and just lurking and listening to me read. If you guys like my story times, let me know. Let me know if you guys have any suggestions of stories that you guys want to hear. Remember, stories do have to be in the public domain, so that we don't get copyrighted or anything along those lines. So, we do have a person I think that we can raid. Let me go and check to make sure that they're alive. And then we'll raid. And then I'm gonna go and figure out what in the heck I'm gonna eat for dinner tonight. Man, they are streaming. Okay. I don't know what Quantum Break is, but they are streaming Quantum Break. So I figured we could go raid them. And they're trying to get to affiliates. So if you guys want to go help them out, that would be really cool of you guys. I would really appreciate it. Help them get to affiliate. And they're a good friend. And later we might be playing Fallout 76. So that would be cool if you guys come hang out. If not, I totally understand. My voice is like literally, I'm gonna lose it. I already know it. So anyways, I will see you guys on Thursday with Spyro. Hopefully we can beat it, and hopefully it doesn't cause me to rage too much for some reason. Anyways, thank you guys so much for hanging out, and I will see you guys in the next stream. Y'all come back now here, and y'all have a good one. Let's go raid!